evening and welcome to The Proof is Out There. If there's one thing we love to talk about on this show, other than UFOs and Bigfoot, of course, it's sharks. They're big, they're scary, truly mysterious creatures. And this next one might just be the most internet-famous shark in history. And you're about to see why. October 4th, 2016, a video is posted on Facebook, allegedly recorded in the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean situated to the south of Japan. It's a dark, foreign world, but this time it's not the strange environment that has captured people's attention. We see a large cage said to be a discarded anti-shark diving cage, which can average between 8 and 13 feet in length. Entering on the left is a large fish that many estimate to be around 6 feet in length. Then suddenly, a giant visitor arrives, knocking aside the smaller sea life. A shark that dwarfs the cage entirely, swimming slowly into the frame. He pokes and prods with his snout before losing interest and swimming away. Let's see that again. If that cage is between 8 and 13 feet across, we are looking at a shark of monstrous proportions, possibly exceeding 60 feet in length. Field researcher Ken Gerhardt takes a look at this subaquatic colossus.
Now, since currently known species of sharks obtain these lengths, one can then make an argument that what we're looking at here, as remarkable as it sounds, is actually a surviving representative of a prehistoric shark called Megalodon.
The Megalodon was a species of massive shark that went extinct during the Pliocene era. Experts say they could grow to be over 50 to 60 feet long. They would make meals out of humpback whales, and with an estimated jaw size of 9 by 11 feet, they could potentially swallow 2 full-sized human beings in one gulp.
The average depth of the Earth's oceans is 12,000 feet. But in this particular location, known as the Mariana Trench, which has been estimated to be 7 miles deep. So if you factor in the location, the fact that the Mariana Trench is literally so deep that anything could be there, it builds a pretty strong case that this thing could actually be, potentially, a surviving Megalodon.
There's been one more thing that's been bugging those who have studied this video on the web.
Some observers of this video have noted that there appears to be some type of device placed around the shark's eye, almost like a sort of tracking device. This has opened up all types of speculation about the possibility that the Japanese government may be aware of the existence of Megalodon and may in fact be tracking this particular animal for scientific purposes.
Did you know the word Megalodon derives from the Greek meaning giant tooth? It checks out. These guys' teeth were each roughly the size of your hand. We know this thing was big enough to inspire the popular movie series, but is it still really swimming? Let's go deep with our experts. First things first, wildlife biologist and shark enthusiast Floyd Hayes tells us that this video is a great example of viral stories taking on a life of their own.
The large shark that appears in this video footage was allegedly filmed in the Marianas Trench, and it represents a classic case of video taken for scientific research that's been exaggerated in the media.
A rediscovered Japanese posting of this video from 8 years earlier reveals a completely different location on where this actually took place.
This was actually taken in Suruga Bay in Japan in water less than a mile deep. What we're seeing here is a bait cage, not a diving cage, and a large shark is trying to get the food out of it. A baited cage is about 3 to 4 feet wide.
When we take a closer look, the cage does have dimensions more comparable to a bait cage than a diving cage, which usually has enough room to house several people. Marine biologist Shay Steingass agrees with Dr. Hayes that this cage is much smaller than purported, but that doesn't mean this isn't a big animal.
Each segment of that cage is at least a few feet. Just looking at the head itself, that's at least a few feet just to the gills. So it's possible this animal could be 20 feet or even bigger.
So the age-old question remains, what is it? According to Steingass, the answer lies with the strange object many claim to be a tracking device.
From what I can tell looking at this footage, this is a Pacific sleeper shark. And there's one key feature that really allows me to guess that, and that's this parasite that co-evolved with this species.
Wait a second. Did she say parasite?
Some people have hypothesized that this animal has tracking devices or something attached to it, and that's not what we're seeing here. This parasite is called Ometacoida elongata, which is a parasitic copepod that develops in the eye of the shark. Eventually, the shark will go blind from this parasite, but that's not a huge issue for the shark because it doesn't use its vision a lot. We actually don't know very much about the Pacific sleeper shark at all. We haven't really found a mature specimen.
Our verdict? This is a Pacific sleeper shark. But just because it's been named and classified doesn't end the mystery. These creatures are closely related to the Greenland shark, which can live up to 500 years. So for all we know, this same shark will still be swimming long after we're all gone. SETI, an organization dedicated to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, spends time and money pointing giant radio telescopes at distant galaxies. But maybe there's no need to search light years away. One man thinks he may have uncovered evidence of advanced intelligence a mere 94 million miles from here, at the center of our own solar system. From 2006 to 2022, David Toon, a retired Army aviation officer, has been conducting imagery analysis on NASA-archived solar satellite photos. He's reviewed over 5 million and has singled out more than 50,000 that he thinks show suspicious events or objects. Look closer. Set against the soft plumes of energy are hard-edged objects in various colors, shapes, and sizes, all hovering in close proximity to the sun. David believes these are examples of technosignatures, which are defined as signs of intelligent life beyond our Earth.
The images indicate there is a more organized pattern to these objects. The lines, the shapes are all basic evidence that there's intelligence behind it. It's not just a natural phenomenon.
Investigative journalist MJ Banaya says there are many who support the theory of a solar-based civilization. In fact, in 2016, scientific journal Acta Astronautica published researcher Clement Vidal's groundbreaking abstract entitled Stellivore Extraterrestrials, Binary Stars as Living Systems.
Clement Vidal speculates that life could evolve to use solar energy to fuel itself. He refers to these creatures as stellivores.
These theoretical star eaters would actively feed on stars like the sun.
Much like we consume organic material to fuel our bodies, there could possibly be alien life out there that uses solar energy to fuel itself.
Today, as the SETI Institute continues the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, it is giving credence to the stellivore theory as it decides which stars to look at next. But could these hypothetical beings really be actively feeding on our sun? Let's see if our experts can shed any light on the subject. First, physicist Matthew Shadagis immediately takes a bite out of the stellivore theory.
The reason why I don't think this is applicable to our current situation is that in the stellivore model, that is an explanation for certain binary star systems.
A binary star system occurs when two stars orbit a shared center of mass, making them gravitationally bound to one another. Shadagis explains that Vidal actually envisions stellivores as one half of this kind of system.
One of the members of a binary star system is an actual star, whereas the other apparent star is actually some sort of advanced construction or artificial structure that is taking energy out of the star.
Of course, our solar system doesn't have two suns.
Since our solar system is not a binary system, this is not really an applicable hypothesis to the current situation.
Then could it be another kind of alien structure? Perhaps the beginnings of a Dyson sphere? This megastructure, dreamed up by theoretical physicist Freeman Dyson, would surround stars and harvest their power for its alien engineers. But again, Shadagis doesn't see it, because he doesn't see solid structures in these shapes at all.
We could be looking at natural gases, plasma, or other things coming out of the sun together with a camera artifact that makes that chunk of gas look more geometric than it actually is.
And astrophotography expert Andrew McCarthy agrees, noting that while NASA only employs state-of-the-art cameras, those cameras do have their limitations.
I think the most likely culprit is simply a camera artifact. The goal behind this CCD technology used by NASA is to just preserve the data it's collecting. But it has a side effect. As these specific camera pixels fill up, they tend to bleed into the surrounding areas. Sometimes that creates unusual shapes in the photos. It's not a sign of any kind of object floating out there near the sun. It's just a sign of how the technology actually works.
But Shadaga says the sun continues to spark intrigue.
Recently, we had an example in the news of a coronal mass ejection. Headlines around the world read things like, "Piece of the sun breaks off and forms a vortex and scientists are baffled." And this just underscores how there are natural phenomena that the sun produces that can still baffle us. That doesn't mean they're paranormal or extraterrestrial.
Our verdict? These are unexplained solar images. While we agree with McCarthy that some of these images may be easily explained by camera artifacts, we can't prove it for all of them. We also can't say for certain if this is or is not a natural solar phenomenon. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence has now gone on for more than 60 years with no luck. But nobody's giving up. After all, there are still hundreds of billions of stars to investigate. In the past, we have examined paintings, hieroglyphs, and cave art to search for signs of extraterrestrial visitation. But do these next images actually show ancient people interacting with alien life forms? It's March 2017 in the rainforest of Huatusco in the Mexican state of Veracruz. Explorer Jose Aguayo and his colleagues are checking out some caves when they come across something that needs to be seen to be believed.
El encontrar esta cueva para mí fue algo nuevo y diferente y que quizá fue lo que cambió completamente todo.
Jose begins documenting the cave walls and floor, which are covered in intricate carvings. And in a nearby river, they stumble upon something even more compelling, this triangular piece of jade. On the left is a typical Mayan leader wearing a traditional headdress, but on the right is what looks like an alien being. The two appear to be exchanging gifts, and above the figures is a craft that looks shockingly like a UFO. Jose says the people who led them to this spot did so for a very specific reason.
Y nos decía aquí, a esta cueva, realmente que cayó una nave ahí y que después de eso veían unos chaparritos.
Author and lecturer Jason Martell says the artifacts Jose's group found at this site have been nicknamed the Stones of the First Encounter.
Some of the people that discovered these artifacts went on to theorize that there was some type of an interaction and exchange happening between the Mayans and the extraterrestrials. And maybe there's still in existence in part of these caves extraterrestrial technology.
But Martell says this isn't the first time people have claimed aliens visited Mesoamerica.
There was a 1,000-year-old Mexican cemetery unearthed while some locals were trying to create an irrigation channel. And the discovery was of over a dozen of these very elongated skulls, very similar to these jade aliens.
Martell notes that many people see a resemblance between this image and multiple accounts of gray aliens, known for their gray skin, bulbous heads, small bodies, and black almond-shaped eyes. And he says there may be other references to alien encounters in ancient Mayan texts.
The former minister of tourism for the Mexican state of Campeche went on record confirming the discovery of extraterrestrial life. He also mentions that there are around 3,000-year-old landing pads hidden in the jungle, and that there are ancient Mayan codices that have been hidden from the public, which clearly discuss extraterrestrial contact.
Even one of the most well-known Mayan codices, the nearly 1,000-year-old Dresden Codex, includes advanced knowledge of astronomy and celestial bodies. So could these Mayan jade stones have been carved to commemorate an interplanetary visit? Let's see what our experts can dig up. Anthropologist Kathy Strain looks into whether the alien-like skulls found in the cemetery help support the idea this is an alien on the Jadestone.
These bodies that we have found that have elongated skulls do look very alien, but of course, once we do the DNA and we know the culture, we know for certain that these people are human. It is just a cultural practice known as head binding, where the distortion of the cranium is important to that culture. Generally, only those with power in that culture do this.
So the elongated skulls aren't from alien visitors. But our question is, do these artifacts truly document Mayans interacting with extraterrestrials? Archaeologist Dr. Ed Barnhart says the stone wasn't discovered in the right area if it really is depicting an alien and a Mayan leader.
The location where it's found is in what we call Mesoamerica, a very large area of a patchwork of civilizations. But it is not in the Maya area. The Maya area kind of radiates out from where Guatemala is into Belize, Honduras, Yucatan, Chiapas, but Veracruz is far outside of the Maya area.
He adds that the material it's made of is also surprising.
If it is indeed jade, it's the largest piece of carved jade I've ever seen in Mesoamerica. It's huge. Jade is nowhere near Veracruz. They'd have to import that from hundreds of miles away, and the vast majority of jade objects that I've seen carved are something you could hold in the palm of your hand.
What's more, Strange says this isn't up to the usual aesthetic standards of the Maya.
The Mayans were very artistic. These really come off as being very simple, very crude. They come off as being stereotypical of what you would see in a 1950s alien film.
Strain adds that the piece has yet to be put under a microscope to be accurately dated.
The National Institute of Anthropology and History of Mexico have not authenticated these artifacts. And so until they do so, I do not put any stock that these are real artifacts from the Mayans. I would like to believe that these are artifacts, but I believe they're more artifictions.
Our verdict? These are likely fake artifacts. The stones are inconsistent with Mayan traditions, and nothing else like them has been found elsewhere in Mexico. So their age and authenticity remain in doubt, at least for now. We have all heard the expression, walking on a cloud, which basically describes a feeling of blissful happiness. It's just a saying, right? But someone or something may be taking it literally. Check this out. It's December 2015 in the skies above Europe. Irish workforce manager Nick O'Donoghue is on board a flight from Austria to London's Gatwick Airport when he sees something strange out of his window.
It was a beautiful, clear day, and in the distance I could see an unusual looking shape in the clouds, and so I tried to zoom in as close as possible to get a good enough picture of it.
Nick's uncanny photo shows what appears to be a looming humanoid form stalking the clouds at 30,000 feet. The large, imposing figure with a broad torso, small head, and short legs appears to cast a long shadow.
I really had no idea what it was. My initial thought was, it looks a bit like the Michelin Man, you know?
There's also another legendary being known to inhabit the clouds in this region. That would be the Brockengespenst, or Brockenspectre, often seen on Germany's Brocken Peak. It's said to be an evil spirit taking the form of a shadow ringed by a rainbow halo. Or perhaps this is another elusive otherworldly being, like those some associate with the South American cloud warriors, the Chachapoya tribe of the Andes. These advanced ancient cloud people are known for creating strange humanoid statues that rest on a cliff face above the Utcubamba River Valley, in a site that's almost 700 years older than Machu Picchu. Science writer Amy Title says these sarcophagi have an appearance that is atypical for the region, leading some to suggest they depict a cloud-based non-human intelligence.
Could these statues be depicting extraterrestrials that interacted with locals sometime in the 11th or 12th century? The area where they were found is high in the mountains and is quite isolated. So the idea is, if there was some kind of extraterrestrial that interacted with this community, could they have learned from them?
Let's take a closer look at this strange formation. you can see that it's smaller than the surrounding clouds. But of course, our perspective is distorted since it's a view from a plane. Given how high the plane is, this could be thousands of feet tall. Let's consult our experts. We turn first to meteorologist Juan Hernandez to consider the obvious explanation. Could it just be a natural formation in the clouds?
When comparing this figure to something natural, like a cumulus cloud or a cumulonimbus cloud, oftentimes it's one single plume. In this case, we have two plumes coming out of a very close location. And if we take a look at the base, we see a gap between them. If it was natural, there would be no gap.
So then could this actually be something from out of this world? Well, not so fast. Hernandez believes there's no indication it's an actual humanoid being.
As an atmospheric scientist, I can say that this is something that is not solid matter. It's part of the atmosphere. We can tell that there's quite a bit of contrast between the rising plume and the surrounding area. The plume we have here is air that is ascending.
Of course, there's a chance an advanced alien intelligence could manifest as a cloud, but science writer Mick West thinks he's found a more likely explanation.
I think we're looking at a bunch of chimneys, and they're releasing some kind of smoke or water vapor into the air in the form of clouds. So the most likely thing, I think, is some type of power station, because power stations have these very tall smokestacks.
And West may have pinpointed exactly which smokestacks are responsible.
The Doel power station in Belgium, because we have these two very dramatic cooling towers, and most of what they are releasing is plumes of condensation of water vapor in this type of shape.
Our verdict? These are cooling tower plumes. The ancient mystery of the cloud warriors of the Andes remains and requires much further study. As for whether non-human intelligence might exist up in our atmosphere, for that answer, you'll need to keep your head in the clouds. When you think of ghosts, you think of them avenging a wrong or haunting some dilapidated house in the woods. But could they be in pursuit of something far simpler? Say a midnight snack. It's September 2021 in Nova Scotia, Canada. Construction worker Catelyn Cormier is in the kitchen at a job site when suddenly something goes haywire. As his co-worker opens the doors of a cabinet, a jar of peanut butter is wildly spinning completely on its own. Take another look. The sight of the spinning spread freaks Catelyn out.
I had chills down the back of my neck. Everyone else's reaction in the room was kind of like, this isn't real. They kind of thought it was a joke.
But Catelyn believes the spinning Skippy has a supernatural source.
I was a believer in ghosts. I've seen some kind of wonky things in my past. But this kind of just set it off to like, whoa, what's going on?
And it's not the only ghostly kitchen activity that's been caught on camera.
Someone help me understand why my pizza is breakdancing.
Check out this seemingly possessed pizza slice and this skillet spiraling out of control while cooking food on a stovetop. Are ghosts responsible? Author Alexis Brooks says it makes sense that spirits coming back in the afterlife would end up in the kitchen.
Everyone considers the kitchen the heart of the home, right? So when you think about those in the spirit world, would it be any wonder that once they leave the physical world, they want to replicate that experience of being in the kitchen?
But how would a ghost be able to cook like this in a kitchen? Some base their belief in the very existence of ghosts in the first law of thermodynamics, which states energy cannot be created or destroyed. They claim when a person dies, their energy is just transformed into a new electromagnetic form that can still inhabit the same space where they once lived, move things around, and make noise. Now, ghost kitchens do exist. They're restaurants without tables, just a kitchen to prepare takeout. But this video takes the term to a whole new level. Could we really be witnessing spirits in the pursuit of one last supper? Let's see what our experts can cook up. So does science support the idea that a ghost could be moving these kitchen items? Theoretical physicist Dr. Michio Kaku has doubts.
Some people have claimed that maybe ghosts are made out of pure energy, but energy is unstable. You cannot confine energy to one area to create a ghost as we know it.
Even though the first law of thermodynamics says energy can't be destroyed, the second law states that as energy is transformed, more and more of it is wasted. So a ghost wouldn't be able to maintain its structure over time. So science writer Mick West considers if some other form of thermal energy is causing the pizza to spin.
The front end is kind of lifted up and the back end is also kind of lifted up. And because there's lots of air circulating around, if the pizza starts to slide and rotate, it will actually keep spinning around upon this little pivot point that it has in the middle.
West demonstrates what he's talking about.
I actually built a simulation of a piece of pizza, and when I spin it, it will keep spinning because there's only a small part of the pizza which is in contact with the bottom of the oven.
This explains why the pizza is spinning, but this skillet doesn't have a pivot point. So how does it start moving? Kaku says there might be a non-ghostly explanation if some hot water droplets got on the stove.
If you get a hot skillet like this and drop a droplet of water, sometimes it doesn't evaporate immediately, but its skitters are on the surface because it vaporizes. And it's like a cushion. It'll spin because it's actually floating on a thin layer of steam. This is called the Leidenfrost effect.
This is a cool trick of science, yet West thinks it's not just a wet stove that's causing it, but some outright manipulation.
If we look at how long the pot takes to complete one full revolution from here to here, and then we time it again for the next one, and then one more time, each time it's actually slowing down. So we got a pot on a low friction surface because of the Leidenfrost effect, and somebody just grabbed the pot and gave it a little spin.
So what about the peanut butter, which is neither on nor near an electrical cooking appliance? West suspects this might be a bit of sleight of hand.
What we're seeing here is a spinning jar which is slowing down. And that means there was an initial spin and it's gradually losing rotational velocity via friction. So I think what's going on is that there's something underneath the jar, or perhaps they used some kind of bearing. And I bought one of these little bearings, and then I have a peanut butter jar with a matching race on the bottom. And if I put the jar on here, now we have a peanut butter jar that will spin seemingly by itself.
In the end, our verdict on this one is mixed. Despite Catlin swearing he did nothing to make the peanut butter spin, it's likely the jar was placed on a small hidden bearing. The skillet rotated as a result of the Leidenfrost effect and perhaps a little manual push. And circulating air turned the pivot point on the pizza. So it looks like natural science, not the supernatural, provides the best explanation. Canada has a long UFO history, and its government keeps a public record of sightings. In 2020, the number was 1,243, a notable uptick from the previous year, continuing a trend that goes back decades. But of all those sightings over all those years, there may be none as famous as this. November 7th, 1990. It's just after 7 p.m. in downtown Montreal, Canada. A guest is enjoying an evening swim in the rooftop pool at the Bonaventure Hotel, when suddenly she looks up into the sky and sees this. Look closely. 4 strange glowing green lights seem to point outward from the center like spokes, while 2 bright yellow lights can clearly be seen in the center of the object. The woman notifies management, and soon a group of people, including the police, come to the hotel rooftop. As the crowd gathers, initial estimates among witnesses place the lights at least 1,000 feet above the hotel.
The Bonaventure UFO incident was very unique because almost 30 people saw this strange object in the sky hovering above this hotel. And more bizarrely, this hovers above this hotel for 2 or 3 hours, and you would assume people in the city would see it. But the only people who were able to see this were the people on the roof of the hotel or on the sidewalk just outside it when they looked up.
Additionally, no aircraft was identified in that location by military or commercial radar. So what happened, and why this specific hotel?
2 UFO researchers were able to comprise a report quite quickly after the encounter, and they were able to collect significant witness testimony.
The witnesses all described to investigators a craft that matches what's seen in the photograph.
This story has everything. And when you get a whole bunch of people telling the same story, it's going to automatically draw a lot of attention.
Montreal's Hotel Bonaventure is nestled on the top 2 floors of the sprawling 17-story Place Bonaventure. When it first opened in 1967, it was the world's largest commercial building at 3.1 million square feet, more than the Empire State Building. So perhaps the reason the alleged UFO in 1990 selected the Hotel Bonaventure was its size. But is it even a UFO? We asked our experts to take a look.
Basing it on the image here, possibly a helicopter that has a searchlight or some type of bright lights attached to it, but you would be able to see the warning lights that are on helicopters. Also, you can hear helicopters from miles away. They're loud, especially one that is hovering for 3 hours. That's a long time. But none of the eyewitnesses mentioned hearing a helicopter. So we could be looking at a drone, but this photograph was taken in 1990. The military-level drone technology was still in its infancy. And frankly, if we were looking at military testing drone technology, you don't do that over civilian populated areas.
In fact, Tim McMillan believes if it is a flying machine, it's not one we know of.
We're able to rule out fixed-wing planes because they can't hover. I don't know of any good aerospace platform that would be able to fit both what we're seeing in the picture and what eyewitnesses said.
Is it possible location plays a factor? Meteorologist Juan Hernandez notes that Canada is well known for one of the most spectacular natural phenomena on Earth.
My initial thought was, could it be the aurora borealis? But aurora borealis often move and are quite transient. In this case, the report was stationary light that lasted for several hours.
But the hazy nature of the photo does lead Hernandez to investigate if Mother Nature could still be playing a role.
I was able to track down the weather observations from that day. We do have temperatures that were actually about 30 to 34 degrees while this was occurring, but the relative humidity itself was somewhat on the high side. So whenever you have something like this, you oftentimes develop either some sort of fog or low clouds.
For astronomer and video effects designer Mark D'Antonio, that may be the key to solving this mystery.
I believe that we're seeing a reflection back from the clouds, the fog, that look like something else. So these lights could have been lights from the pool and from some other lighting around the Bonaventure Hotel, reflecting up into the sky and then down to the pool again.
It's a plausible theory, but if it was the reflected pool light, wouldn't the guests and police there that night have put 2 and 2 together? Plus, consider this. It's been 30 years. There have been many foggy nights in Montreal in that time, and if it's a reflection, it's one that's never been seen again.
Whenever you're trying to form a really good investigation, you're testing different hypotheses, but I'm inclined to believe that multiple, potentially up to 80 witnesses, someone would have been able to determine if it was a light being reflected categorically, based on the image and what the eyewitnesses said, it is a UFO.
Our verdict? We're going with genuine UFO. As McMillan says, while there are plausible theories, in our view, we still don't have a smoking gun. The Hotel Bonaventure incident is still considered one of the most famous UFO sightings in Canada. So much so that in 2020, it was depicted on a $20 silver glow-in-the-dark coin. In every episode, we do a call-out asking you for videos you think we should investigate. We asked, and you answered. This next video arrived via tweet from one of our dedicated proof viewers, and as soon as I saw it, I gotta say, I definitely had some questions too. September 24th, 2022. Chad Turner and his girlfriend are enjoying a leisurely evening stroll outside their apartment complex in Westchester, Pennsylvania. But then, at about 7:30 p.m., something strange in the sky grabs their attention.
Me and Anna are here looking at something. We don't know what it is.
Chad quickly breaks out his cell phone and captures this.
What is that?
A bright, white dot moves slowly above the trees. A closer look reveals it's emitting beams of light that appear to form a peculiar arrow-like shape. As a fan of the show, Chad knows what to do next. He starts to break down the possibilities.
That's not an airplane. That's like too bright to be a plane. You see the aura around it? That's crazy. We were kind of awe-stricken by it, but at the same time, we were a little nervous too, because you don't know where this thing is going to go.
Chad follows the object until suddenly it disappears.
It's gone, not here.
Yo, that's crazy.
Is it possible Chad captured a genuine UFO? Writer Amy Teitel says it's not the first time a strange streaking light has been spotted in the skies over Pennsylvania.
On December 9th of 1965, an acorn-shaped fireball fell through the sky and landed in a wooded area near the small town of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. This was so bright that people saw it in 6 states and even in Canada. It was such a powerful landing that observers heard the crash and felt the ground shudder when it impacted.
Teitel says the crash area was later sealed by the U.S. Army, who told everybody there was nothing in the woods.
It wasn't until 40 years later that the U.S. government and NASA said that the object had in fact been a downed Soviet satellite. A lot of people who saw the fireball didn't accept this as the explanation and were convinced that it was something extraterrestrial.
Let's take a closer look at Chad's video. What I find most fascinating about this object is the triangle-like shape of the vapor trail left behind. This angle right here is almost a perfect 90 degrees. It's definitely unlike any exhaust pattern I've ever seen. But let's find out what our experts think. While we encourage viewers to send us videos, we also need to make sure we're not getting punked. So first, we send Chad's footage to video forensic analyst Michael Primo.
There was an abundance of specific metadata throughout the file, and because it retained the GPS information, that's significant in terms of processing. Because if this was something that was fabricated, for example, or CGI'd, we wouldn't have that data. I detect no evidence to suggest that this is been fabricated or manipulated.
Okay, we have a legit video. But of what? Could it be a UFO? We asked Rich Hoffman of the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies.
I certainly can understand why people would consider it to be a UFO or something unusual, but there's no instantaneous acceleration. All you see is a very consistent movement across the sky. There's nothing extraterrestrial in my looking at that.
If it's not a UFO, could it be another kind of extraterrestrial visitor? It's a possibility that Chad considered.
You know what I'm wondering if that's a shooting star.
Shooting star?
But Rich Hoffman has doubts.
Meteors basically last a few seconds, and it would have been a long trail of a flame or something like that coming back from the bottom. But the effect in the atmosphere that you see is very, very symmetrical.
Military aviation expert Tim McMillan believes it's that symmetrical contrail that provides an important clue.
We see a more consistent, dense contrail that's coming behind it. So this tells me we're seeing a lot of the telltale signs of this is a man-made object that's burning fuel.
Rather than something falling down to Earth, McMillan sees evidence for something going up.
To me, it definitely had characteristics that led me to believe this was probably a SpaceX launch because of the interesting cone and shape that we see here.
Hoffman adds that a rocket also explains why Chad and his girlfriend quickly lost sight of the object behind a row of trees.
What happens is the first stage, separation, and then there's a second stage, and then that separates. It cuts off the engines. So as they're moving to the other side of the tree, you don't see any effects because it's not burning the engines any longer.
Ultimately, McMillan says the records confirm the theory.
In checking when this was filmed, we could say with a high degree of certainty is the launch of a Falcon 9 SpaceX rocket out of Cape Canaveral, Florida, carrying Starlink satellites into the Earth's atmosphere.
The first rays of the solar cycle spilled over the horizon, painting the observatory in a molten hue that seemed almost unnatural, as if the sun itself were aware of the scrutiny it faced. And deep inside the control room, Dr. Evelyn Hartley stared at the monitors with a mix of awe and dread, her fingers hovering above the keyboard, the hum of the machines and the subtle vibration of the floor beneath her feet blending into a rhythm that felt both comforting and ominous, because for weeks now, her team had detected anomalies in the solar flares, patterns that defied all known physics, bursts of energy that flickered with an intelligence, almost as though something were communicating through the plasma. And the more Evelyn studied the data, the more she felt the creeping suspicion that the sun was not merely a star, but a sentient entity, or at least a conduit for entities beyond human comprehension. And the irony that humanity had spent centuries looking outward for extraterrestrial life while ignoring the colossal inferno above their heads was not lost on her, especially as the first clear images from the solar probe transmitted through the vast distance between the corona and the lab, revealing structures that resembled gigantic, crystalline towers suspended in the plasma, their geometry precise and deliberate, impossible by any natural process known to humankind, and her heart pounded as she realized these formations were not stationary, they shifted and pulsed. Responding to her analysis, almost as if acknowledging her gaze, and she could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her. To alert the world could mean global hysteria, yet to remain silent might leave humanity unprepared for whatever intelligence had chosen to manifest in the very center of the solar system, while outside, the sky glowed with an intensity that seemed to vibrate with soundless tones, frequencies that resonated in the bones of the observatory, making every hair on her arms stand on end, and she recalled the legends of solar gods and beings of fire whispered in the oldest civilizations, myths dismissed by modern science as mere superstition, but now she could not help but wonder if those myths were memories, echoes of first contact, lost in translation over millennia, and as she scrutinized the high-resolution images, she noticed shadows moving across the corona, shadows that had no right to exist given the searing brightness, elongated and serpentine, with motion that was deliberate and intelligent, and the deeper she probed, the more patterns emerged, subtle but undeniable, grids of light that pulse in sync with magnetic anomalies, forming shapes reminiscent of known alphabets, yet alien, and she thought she could almost decipher meaning if only she had the key, and then there was the sound, barely perceptible but unmistakable, a deep harmonic resonance that seemed to rise and fall with the flare activity, like a celestial heartbeat, or perhaps a message being broadcast across the void, and Evelyn felt a shiver run through her, a mixture of fear and exhilaration, because if this was communication, it meant someone, or something, was watching, aware of humanity in a way that defied all assumptions of cosmic solitude, and she turned to her assistant, Dr. Miguel Santos, whose own eyes were wide with the same mix of terror and fascination, and whispered, almost afraid to voice the thought aloud, "It's alive, Miguel. The sun, it's alive, or it's being used by something alive." Miguel, who had spent years dismissing conspiracy theories and fringe speculation, could only nod, the gravity of the situation washing over him, because no one could explain the data through conventional astrophysics, not with particle accelerators, not with coronal simulations, not with quantum models, and outside the observatory, the horizon shimmered as if reality itself were bending under the intensity of what they were witnessing, and Evelyn recalled the intercepted satellite footage from the International Space Station, frames that showed strange, luminous forms rising from the solar surface, curling like ribbons of molten metal, then splitting into geometrically perfect prisms, their motion too precise to be random, too orchestrated to be natural, and she had spent nights comparing the sun's emissions to historical records, searching for precedents, and found nothing, except for centuries-old folklore mentioning fiery chariots and serpentine beings in the sky, tales long thought metaphorical but now frighteningly literal, and as she processed the telemetry, a sudden spike in the ultraviolet spectrum lit the lab screens with blinding intensity, the monitors flickering and buzzing as if overwhelmed by the magnitude of the data, and Miguel instinctively shielded his eyes, while Evelyn's mind raced, connecting fragments of insight like a puzzle she had never known she was meant to solve, realizing that the energy spikes corresponded with the formation of those crystalline towers, as if the sun itself was a stage for some incomprehensible architecture, and she could almost sense presence, a watchful intelligence shaping plasma, bending light, crafting forms in a dance of incomprehensible scale, and then the communications console crackled with interference, static overlaid with tones that resembled language, though no human tongue, and Evelyn leaned closer, straining to interpret, her pulse quickening, because it was the first unambiguous contact, and the realization hit her, this was a call, and humanity was being beckoned to respond, yet the implications terrified her. because the knowledge of such beings could destabilize politics, religion, even the collective psyche of civilization, and she wondered who, if anyone, should be informed first. While outside, the sky shimmered as if reality itself were bending under the intensity of what they were witnessing, and Evelyn recalled the intercepted satellite footage from the International Space Station, frames that showed strange, luminous forms rising from the solar surface, curling like ribbons of molten metal, then splitting into geometrically perfect prisms, their motion too precise to be random, too orchestrated to be natural, and she had spent nights comparing the sun's emissions to historical records, searching for precedents, and found nothing, except for centuries-old folklore mentioning fiery chariots and serpentine beings in the sky, tales long thought metaphorical but now frighteningly literal, and as she processed the telemetry, a sudden spike in the ultraviolet spectrum lit the lab screens with blinding intensity, the monitors flickering and buzzing as if overwhelmed by the magnitude of the data, and Miguel instinctively shielded his eyes, while Evelyn's mind raced, connecting fragments of insight like a puzzle she had never known she was meant to solve, realizing that the energy spikes corresponded with the formation of those crystalline towers, as if the sun itself was a stage for some incomprehensible architecture, and she could almost sense presence, a watchful intelligence shaping plasma, bending light, crafting forms in a dance of incomprehensible skill, and then the communications console crackled with interference, static overlaid with tones that resembled language, though no human tongue, and Evelyn leaned closer, straining to interpret, her pulse quickening, because it was the first unambiguous contact, and the realization hit her, this was a call, and humanity was being beckoned to respond, yet the implications terrified her, because the knowledge of such beings could destabilize politics, religion, even the collective psyche of civilization, and she wondered who, if anyone, should be informed first. While outside, the sky shimmered as if reality itself were bending under the intensity of what they were witnessing, and Evelyn recalled the intercepted satellite footage from the International Space Station, frames that showed strange, luminous forms rising from the solar surface, curling like ribbons of molten metal, then splitting into geometrically perfect prisms, their motion too precise to be random, too orchestrated to be natural, and she had spent nights comparing the sun's emissions to historical records, searching for precedents, and found nothing, except for centuries-old folklore mentioning fiery chariots and serpentine beings in the sky, tales long thought metaphorical but now frighteningly literal, and as she processed the telemetry, a sudden spike in the ultraviolet spectrum lit the lab screens with blinding intensity, the monitors flickering and buzzing as if overwhelmed by the magnitude of the data, and Miguel instinctively shielded his eyes, while Evelyn's mind raced, connecting fragments of insight like a puzzle she had never known she was meant to solve, realizing that the energy spikes corresponded with the formation of those crystalline towers, as if the sun itself was a stage for some incomprehensible architecture, and she could almost sense presence, a watchful intelligence shaping plasma, bending light, crafting forms in a dance of incomprehensible skill, and then the communications console crackled with interference, static overlaid with tones that resembled language, though no human tongue, and Evelyn leaned closer, straining to interpret, her pulse quickening, because it was the first unambiguous contact, and the realization hit her, this was a call, and humanity was being beckoned to respond, yet the implications terrified her, because the knowledge of such beings could destabilize politics, religion, even the collective psyche of civilization, and she wondered who, if anyone, should be informed first. While outside, the horizon shimmered as if reality itself were bending under the intensity of what they were witnessing, and Evelyn recalled the intercepted satellite footage from the International Space Station, frames that showed strange, luminous forms rising from the solar surface, curling like ribbons of molten metal, then splitting into geometrically perfect prisms, their motion too precise to be random, too orchestrated to be natural, and she had spent nights comparing the sun's emissions to historical records, searching for precedents, and found nothing, except for centuries-old folklore mentioning fiery chariots and serpentine beings in the sky, tales long thought metaphorical but now frighteningly literal, and as she processed the telemetry, a sudden spike in the ultraviolet spectrum lit the lab screens with blinding intensity, the monitors flickering and buzzing as if overwhelmed by the magnitude of the data, and Miguel instinctively shielded his eyes, while Evelyn's mind raced, connecting fragments of insight like a puzzle she had never known she was meant to solve, realizing that the energy spikes corresponded with the formation of those crystalline towers, as if the sun itself was a stage for some incomprehensible architecture, and she could almost sense presence, a watchful intelligence shaping plasma, bending light, crafting forms in a dance of incomprehensible skill, and then the communications console crackled with interference, static overlaid with tones that resembled language, though no human tongue, and Evelyn leaned closer, straining to interpret, her pulse quickening, because it was the first unambiguous contact, and the realization hit her. This was a call, and humanity was being beckoned to respond, yet the implications terrified her, because the knowledge of such beings could destabilize politics, religion, even the collective psyche of civilization, and she wondered who, if anyone, should be informed first, while outside, the horizon shimmered as if reality itself were bending under the intensity of what they were witnessing, and Evelyn recalled the intercepted satellite footage from the International Space Station, frames that showed strange, luminous forms rising from the solar surface, curling like ribbons of molten metal, then splitting into geometrically perfect prisms, their motion too precise to be random, too orchestrated to be natural, and she had spent nights comparing the sun's emissions to historical records, searching for precedents, and found nothing, except for centuries-old folklore mentioning fiery chariots and serpentine beings in the sky, tales long thought metaphorical but now frighteningly literal, and as she processed the telemetry, a sudden spike in the ultraviolet spectrum lit the lab screens with blinding intensity, the monitors flickering and buzzing as if overwhelmed by the magnitude of the data, and Miguel instinctively shielded his eyes, while Evelyn's mind raced, connecting fragments of insight like a puzzle she had never known she was meant to solve, realizing that the energy spikes corresponded with the formation of those crystalline towers, as if the sun itself was a stage for some incomprehensible architecture, and she could almost sense presence, a watchful intelligence shaping plasma, bending light, crafting forms in a dance of incomprehensible skill. And then the communications console crackled with interference, static overlaid with tones that resembled language, though no human tongue, and Evelyn leaned closer, straining to interpret, her pulse quickening, because it was the first unambiguous contact, and the realization hit her. This was a call, and humanity was being beckoned to respond, yet the implications terrified her, because the knowledge of such beings could destabilize politics, religion, even the collective psyche of civilization, and she wondered who, if anyone, should be informed first, while outside, the horizon shimmered as if reality itself were bending under the intensity of what they were witnessing, and Evelyn recalled the intercepted satellite footage from the International Space Station, frames that showed strange, luminous forms rising from the solar surface, curling like ribbons of molten metal, then splitting into geometrically perfect prisms, their motion too precise to be random, too orchestrated to be natural, and she had spent nights comparing the sun's emissions to historical records, searching for precedents, and found nothing, except for centuries-old folklore mentioning fiery chariots and serpentine beings in the sky, tales long thought metaphorical but now frighteningly literal, and as she processed the telemetry, a sudden spike in the ultraviolet spectrum lit the lab screens with blinding intensity, the monitors flickering and buzzing as if overwhelmed by the magnitude of the data, and Miguel instinctively shielded his eyes, while Evelyn's mind raced, connecting fragments of insight like a puzzle she had never known she was meant to solve, realizing that the energy spikes corresponded with the formation of those crystalline towers, as if the sun itself was a stage for some incomprehensible architecture, and she could almost sense presence, a watchful intelligence shaping plasma, bending light, crafting forms in a dance of incomprehensible skill, and then the communications console crackled with interference, static overlaid with tones that resembled language, though no human tongue, and Evelyn leaned closer, straining to interpret, her pulse quickening, because it was the first unambiguous contact, and the realization hit her. This was a call, and humanity was being beckoned to respond, yet the implications terrified her, because the knowledge of such beings could destabilize politics, religion, even the collective psyche of civilization, and she wondered who, if anyone, should be informed first, while outside, the horizon shimmered as if reality itself were bending under the intensity of what they were witnessing, and Evelyn recalled the intercepted satellite footage from the International Space Station, frames that showed strange, luminous forms rising from the solar surface, curling like ribbons of molten metal, then splitting into geometrically perfect prisms, their motion too precise to be random, too orchestrated to be natural. And she had spent nights comparing the sun's emissions to historical records, searching for precedents, and found nothing, except for centuries-old folklore mentioning fiery chariots and serpentine beings in the sky, tales long thought metaphorical but now frighteningly literal, and as she processed the telemetry, a sudden spike in the ultraviolet spectrum lit the lab screens with blinding intensity, the monitors flickering and buzzing as if overwhelmed by the magnitude of the data, and Miguel instinctively shielded his eyes, while Evelyn's mind raced, connecting fragments of insight like a puzzle she had never known she was meant to solve, realizing that the energy spikes corresponded with the formation of those crystalline towers, as if the sun itself was a stage for some incomprehensible architecture, and she could almost sense presence, a watchful intelligence shaping plasma, bending light, crafting forms in a dance of incomprehensible skill, and then the communications console crackled with interference, static overlaid with tones that resembled language, though no human tongue, and Evelyn leaned closer, straining to interpret, her pulse quickening, because it was the first unambiguous contact, and the realization hit her. This was a call, and humanity was being beckoned to respond, yet the implications terrified her, because the knowledge of such beings could destabilize politics, religion, even the collective psyche of civilization, and she wondered who, if anyone, should be informed first, while outside, the horizon shimmered as if reality itself were bending under the intensity of what they were witnessing, and Evelyn recalled the intercepted satellite footage from the International Space Station, frames that showed strange, luminous forms rising from the solar surface, curling like ribbons of molten metal, then splitting into geometrically perfect prisms, their motion too precise to be random, too orchestrated to be natural, and she had spent nights comparing the sun's emissions to historical records, searching for precedents, and found nothing, except for centuries-old folklore mentioning fiery chariots and serpentine beings in the sky, tales long thought metaphorical but now frighteningly literal, and as she processed the telemetry, a sudden spike in the ultraviolet spectrum lit the lab screens with blinding intensity, the monitors flickering and buzzing as if overwhelmed by the magnitude of the data, and Miguel instinctively shielded his eyes, while Evelyn's mind raced, connecting fragments of insight like a puzzle she had never known she was meant to solve, realizing that the energy spikes corresponded with the formation of those crystalline towers, as if the sun itself was a stage for some incomprehensible architecture, and she could almost sense presence, a watchful intelligence shaping plasma, bending light, crafting forms in a dance of incomprehensible skill, and then the communications console crackled with interference, static overlaid with tones that resembled language, though no human tongue, and Evelyn leaned closer, straining to interpret, her pulse quickening, because it was the first unambiguous contact, and the realization hit her, this was a call, and humanity was being beckoned to respond, yet the implications terrified her, because the knowledge of such beings could destabilize politics, religion, even the collective psyche of civilization, and she wondered who, if anyone, should be informed first, while outside, the horizon shimmered as if reality itself were bending under the intensity of what they were witnessing, and Evelyn recalled the intercepted satellite footage from the International Space Station, frames that showed strange, luminous forms rising from the solar surface, curling like ribbons of molten metal, then splitting into geometrically perfect prisms, their motion too precise to be random, too orchestrated to be natural, and she had spent nights comparing the sun's emissions to historical records, searching for precedents, and found nothing, except for centuries-old folklore mentioning fiery chariots and serpentine beams in the sky, tales long thought metaphorical but now frighteningly literal, and as she processed the telemetry, a sudden spike in the ultraviolet spectrum lit the lab screens with blinding intensity, the monitors flickering and buzzing as if overwhelmed by the magnitude of the data, and Miguel instinctively shielded his eyes, while Evelyn's mind raced, connecting fragments of insight like a puzzle she had never known she was meant to solve, realizing that the energy spikes corresponded with the formation of those crystalline towers, as if the sun itself was a stage for some incomprehensible architecture, and she could almost sense presence, a watchful intelligence. Shaping plasma, bending light, crafting forms in a dance of incomprehensible skill, and then the communications console crackled with interference, static overlaid with tones that resembled language, though no human tongue, and Evelyn leaned closer, straining to interpret, her pulse quickening, because it was the first unambiguous contact, and the realization hit her. This was a call, and humanity was being beckoned to respond, yet the implications terrified her, because the knowledge of such beings could destabilize politics, religion, even the collective psyche of civilization, and she wondered who, if anyone, should be informed first. As the initial shock of the solar anomaly settled into a tense, electric awareness, Dr. Evelyn Hartley and Dr. Miguel Santos worked tirelessly, eyes glued to the flickering displays, their brains swimming with equations, hypotheses, and fears that bordered on panic, for they both understood that what they were witnessing was not merely a phenomenon but a profound turning point in human history, one that might forever alter humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos, and as Evelyn referenced the spectral emissions with deep space telescopes, she noticed that the mysterious crystalline formations on the sun were not merely isolated, they were part of a network, stretching across thousands of kilometers in the corona, a lattice of light and energy that pulsed rhythmically as if following some cosmic heartbeat, and the realization struck her with the force of a meteor impact. These were not natural formations, and whatever intelligence had constructed them was operating on a scale that dwarfed human comprehension, yet somehow, unnervingly, it appeared to acknowledge them, respond to their instruments, almost like a sentient mind aware of their scrutiny, and she could not shake the sensation that the sun itself was an interface, a living entity, or a portal controlled by beings whose technology, or perhaps biology, made them indistinguishable from divinity, while outside the lab, the city lay bathed in a strange twilight, sunlight filtered through atmospheric distortions that shimmered with unearthly iridescence, and birds circled in odd formations as if sensing the shift in electromagnetic fields, their movements eerily synchronized with the pulse of the sun, and Miguel muttered, his voice tight with tension, "Evelyn, I think is trying to communicate with us," and she nodded, knowing that the idea sounded insane, but the data was irrefutable. Patterns in the plasma align with fluctuations in their instruments, and sequences of light and dark repeated with an intelligence that defied randomness, yet while they tried to interpret the signs, Evelyn's thoughts drifted to the broader implications, how governments might react, how religions might crumble or evolve, how science itself would be forced to confront limits previously thought impossible, and she could almost see the headlines in her mind, Sun revealed as alien interface, extraterrestrial intelligence manipulates solar energy, humanity faces its first direct contact, and each scenario was more terrifying than the last, because even if they survived the initial revelation, the shock to civilization could be catastrophic, and she feared not only the response of humanity but the reaction of whatever was orchestrating the solar spectacle, for they had no idea if it was benevolent, indifferent, or actively hostile. And the thought of provoking an entity capable of controlling a star sent a cold shiver down her spine, while Miguel tapped furiously at a secondary console, pulling up three-dimensional models of the solar lattice and overlaying them with magnetic flux data, and as they watched, the crystalline towers began to shift, bending light and plasma in patterns that formed abstract shapes, some resembling geometric symbols, others forming arcs that hinted at language, yet nothing they had ever encountered, and Evelyn tried to match the frequencies with ancient human symbols, obscure scripts, even mathematical constants, and began to notice a recurring theme: Fibonacci spirals intertwined with hexagonal grids, ratios that seemed deliberately chosen, as if the creators were sending a message encoded in fundamental laws of nature, and the more she analyzed, the more convinced she became that the beings responsible were not only intelligent but extraordinarily patient, working on a scale that could span centuries, perhaps even millennia, a project beyond comprehension. And as she pondered the implications, a sudden alert sounded. Warning of an unknown object approaching Earth's orbit, and the lab erupted into activity. Scientists shouting coordinates and recalibrating sensors, and Evelyn stared at the screen in disbelief as a massive shadow emerged from behind the moon, moving with unnatural speed and precision, its surface shimmering with metallic iridescence, defying radar signatures and conventional detection, and Miguel's face went pale. "It's huge and it's heading straight for us," he whispered, as if speaking louder would somehow summon catastrophe, and Evelyn felt the familiar prickle of fear mixed with exhilaration that came with facing the unknown, because for all their training, nothing could have prepared them for this, and as the object approached, the sun itself seemed to react, sending a concentrated flare of plasma that arced across space, narrowly missing Earth but illuminating the alien craft in spectacular detail, revealing massive, elongated structures that glinted like liquid metal, hulls seemingly woven from light and energy, and the scale was impossible to comprehend, kilometers long yet perfectly proportioned, as though designed by an intelligence unconstrained by human physics, and Evelyn realized with a shock that the craft might be solar-powered, drawing energy directly from the flares they had been studying, and the thought that their sun was a source of alien propulsion made her stomach twist. While the communications consoles began to pick up faint signals, repeating patterns of pulses and tones, as if the craft was attempting to speak, and Evelyn leaned in, straining to decode the sequences, her mind racing through cryptography, harmonic analysis, and symbolic logic, trying desperately to make sense of what might be a first message from an extraterrestrial civilization. Yet as she woke, a different anomaly appeared. Far below the ocean, seismic sensors detected an unprecedented disturbance, a gargantuan movement that rippled across the Pacific, and naval satellites picked up something impossible: massive, dark shapes moving in coordinated patterns beneath the waves, some the size of skyscrapers, others longer than the largest known whales, their bodies shimmering with bioluminescence. And Evelyn felt her pulse quicken as she realized the magnitude of what they were observing: prehistoric creatures, survivors from an ancient age, perhaps Megalodon itself, massive apex predators that had somehow endured extinction, now stirred into motion, moving with intelligence, perhaps guided by the same force orchestrating the solar phenomena. And she thought back to the legends of sea gods and creatures of myth, dismissed as fairy tales, now manifest in terrifying reality, and Miguel stared at the oceanic imagery, his hands trembling over the keyboard, muttering, "They're communicating, they're responding to the sun," and Evelyn swallowed hard, knowing that if the connection between the solar anomalies and the underwater titans was real, humanity had stumbled into a multi-tiered intelligence, one that operated above and below the planet, and the implications were staggering. Predators in the depths guided by extraterrestrial forces, suns turned into messages, and the fragile illusion of human dominion over Earth utterly shattered. While the first reports of unusual tidal surges began coming in from coastal cities, waves appearing without storm or lunar cause, strange phosphorescent patterns glowing beneath the water as if the ocean itself were alive with purpose, and governments scrambled military and scientific assets. But communication breakdowns and panic spread faster than coordination could occur, and Evelyn knew that time was slipping through their fingers, that they were witnessing a chain of events that would either elevate human understanding or annihilate it, as the oceanic behemoths rose closer to shore, shimmering in the strange light from the sun, their sheer size bending the perception of scale, water displaced with every movement in waves that could level coastlines, and the alien craft hovered above, silent and immovable, its lights pulsing in harmony with the sun's flares. If orchestrating the rising of these ancient predators, and Evelyn realized that the planet itself had become a stage, the sun and sea entwined in a cosmic symphony designed by entities whose motives were unknowable, yet deliberate, and she wondered what the creatures of the deep perceived. Did they recognize the forces guiding them? Were they in communication with the beings above the sun, or were they mere instruments, biological marionettes in a drama far beyond human comprehension? N.S. The news feeds filled with footage of the oceanic giants breaching in synchronized patterns, cities trembling under the waves, the world collectively gasped, and Evelyn felt a chill at the realization that humanity was witnessing first contact not as a gentle greeting but as an overwhelming demonstration of power and intelligence, a display that erased centuries of assumed knowledge in an instant, and the sun flares intensified, bathing the earth in spectral lights, ribbons of energy dancing across continents and oceans, while the underwater leviathans moved with grace that belied their bulk, guided by something unseen, and she wondered whether these beings, celestial architects above, ancient predators below, were testing human readiness, or if humanity was simply witnessing the inevitability of forces far older and wiser than themselves, and in that moment, Evelyn understood that everything they had studied about evolution, astrophysics, and biology was but a narrow lens through which to view a much grander, more intricate truth, and she feared the implications of their next moves, because if these entities, above and below, chose to act in ways incomprehensible to human morality or survival instincts, there would be no recourse, and the fragile constructs of society, religion, governance, and science could collapse under the weight of what they were witnessing. And as she relayed the findings to an emergency global scientific council, her voice trembling, every tone measured to convey the gravity without inducing panic, she realized that humanity had no scripts for what was happening, no contingency for contact of this magnitude, and every instinct screamed that they were being observed, tested, perhaps even judged, and the pulse of the sun, the movement of the megalodons, the alien craft hovering in orbit, all synchronized in a terrifyingly precise choreography, a cosmic dance that suggested intelligence, purpose, and perhaps even intent, and Evelyn wondered whether they were witnessing the dawn of a new era for Earth, or the prelude to a cataclysm of scale previously unimaginable, while the oceans glowed with bioluminescent signals, messages perhaps meant to be understood only by the watchers above the sun, and the concept of coincidence seemed absurd, because every anomaly was connected, every event a note in a grand symphony written across dimensions, and she could feel the pull of inevitability as the alien craft and oceanic behemoths aligned with the solar flares, a triangulation of power and presence that defied logic, and Evelyn Hartley, despite fear and awe, felt the stirrings of a resolve, a determination to understand, to communicate, to decode the language of the cosmos, even as the world around her teetered on the brink of panic, because she knew that comprehension was humanity's only chance to survive, to adapt, to find meaning in the overwhelming vastness of forces now active on and around their planet. And as night fell over the observatory, the sun still blazing with unnatural brilliance, and the oceans continuing their airy dance, she felt the weight of history pressing down, knowing that what they witnessed today would define the future of humanity forever, and in that moment, she swore silently that she would not falter, that she would decode the message, understand the intelligence, and attempt to bridge the gap between humanity and the forces now openly manifesting, for retreat was impossible, and ignorance would be fatal. As the night deepened over the observatory, the world outside seemed simultaneously asleep and on the brink of collapse, a surreal dichotomy mirrored in the tension-filled faces of Evelyn Hartley and Miguel Santos as they continued to monitor the synchronized chaos of sun, sea, and sky, their instruments capturing every ripple of energy, every oscillation of light and plasma, yet none of their measurements could fully encompass the scale of what was unfolding, because the solar flares were no longer merely electromagnetic disturbances but appeared to form structures in the corona, structures that resembled massive filaments and lattices of light, intricate and geometrically precise, and she could swear she saw shapes akin to towers, spires, and bridges, all of them alive with motion, pulsing as if drawing energy from some central consciousness, and the alien craft in orbit responded in perfect harmony, its own lights and movements aligning with the solar patterns, a dance of incomprehensible scale that seemed to transcend the laws of physics, while beneath the ocean, the awakened megalodons navigated the deep with intelligence, their movements no longer random but deliberate, almost ritualistic, weaving through underwater currents and ancient trenches in formations that mirrored the crystalline towers above. And Evelyn realized with a shock that the entire planet had become a stage for an orchestrated performance, where the sun, the sea, and extraterrestrial constructs were all instruments in a composition that humanity was only beginning to perceive, and Miguel, pale and unshaven from hours without rest, whispered, "They're communicating, Evelyn. Not with us directly, but with each other, and we're just witnessing it." And Evelyn nodded, her mind racing to process the scale, the intelligence, the implication that Earth itself was being observed as a microcosm of cosmic experimentation. Yet there was no time for contemplation, because coastal cities reported massive tides, waves that rose impossibly high without storm or lunar causation, and satellite feeds displayed vivid bioluminescence across the oceans, patterns that resembled symbols, spirals, grids, and sequences of pulses that hinted at a message, yet defied human comprehension, while the alien craft executed maneuvers that suggested awareness of Earth's military assets, shifting positions to remain outside reach yet close enough to manipulate or observe, and Evelyn's heart pounded as she considered the possibility that the beings controlling the sun, the ocean giants, and the orbiting vessel were acting in unison, coordinating forces that humanity had no hope of countering, and the question that loomed over her was not whether they could survive an attack, but whether survival alone mattered if comprehension was denied, because understanding seemed to be the test, the key to coexisting with intelligences whose power dwarfed human civilization. And as she scrutinized the data, the patterns in the solar flares began to shift again, pulsing faster, brighter, and forming fractal-like spirals that extended across the corona, as if encoding information in three-dimensional space, layers of meaning embedded in light and energy that required a mind capable of perceiving multidimensional sequences, and Evelyn felt her own consciousness strain to grasp the intricacy, the precision, and the purpose, while Miguel manipulated holographic projections of the oceanic behemoths, plotting their movement against the contours of the seafloor, noticing correlations with the solar pulses, and it became increasingly clear that the creatures were acting not as isolated entities but as part of a network, responding to stimuli that originated far above, their behavior patterns reflecting intelligence beyond instinct, evolutionary memory augmented perhaps by external guidance, and the implications were staggering. Survival of these ancient predators had a purpose beyond mere existence, a role in the orchestration of something far larger, far more deliberate than anyone could have imagined, and Evelyn could not suppress the chill that ran down her spine at the realization that humanity had only been given the briefest window of observation before being fully exposed to forces that could decide the planet's fate without input or consent, while outside, satellite arrays began detecting subtle gravitational distortions, minor at first, then escalating rapidly, as though the combined mass of oceanic giants and orbiting constructs exerted pressure on the planet itself, warping local spacetime in ways that defied conventional understanding. And Miguel pointed at a three-dimensional model of the solar corona, showing the interconnections between flare structures, orbiting objects, and oceanic movement, and Evelyn saw the pattern, a triad of energy, matter, and intelligence forming a geometric and temporal alignment, a cosmic signaling system that functioned on scales that outstripped the human lifespan, civilization, and history. And she realized that the megalodons and similar deep-sea entities might have been preserved not merely by luck or biology but deliberately, as instruments of a communication protocol spanning from solar to terrestrial domains, and the realization left her dizzy, because every assumption she had held about biology, astrophysics, and even metaphysics was being challenged, appended, and rewritten before her eyes, while alarms began to sound across the observatory as local government authorities demanded explanations. Military satellites confirmed untraceable aerial objects above key coastlines, and social media erupted with live feeds of strange lights in the ocean and sky, panic rippling across continents. Yet Evelyn and Miguel remained focused on decoding, on finding order in the chaos, believing that comprehension was not merely curiosity but survival, because the signals suggested intention, a deliberate attempt to engage, to provoke understanding, yet not aggression, a test to measure cognitive and technological thresholds, and the longer they observed, the more layers appeared, not merely light and movement, but subtle electromagnetic modulations, harmonic pulses embedded within the plasma and sonar signals, temporal shifts encoded in light intensity and frequency, all of which implied a multimodal intelligence far beyond the scope of human senses and thought processes. And as Evelyn integrated data from multiple instruments, she began to perceive a rudimentary structure in the communication, repetitions, motifs, and sequences that hinted at numerical logic, possibly a primer designed to establish shared reference points before more complex exchanges. And the thought exhilarated her, because it meant that, for the first time, humanity might be capable of comprehension, provided they could synchronize cognition with phenomena that were simultaneously physical, electromagnetic, and perhaps even conscious in nature, while the sun flares intensified into coronal mass ejections that arc over the planet, auroras dancing in tropical regions, electric currents striking with pinpoint precision, and the ocean giants rose in synchrony, spiraling in formations that mirrored the sun's light, creating a choreography of celestial and terrestrial scale. And Evelyn knew that they were witnessing an orchestration, a message designed not merely to inform but to overwhelm, to convey magnitude, intelligence, and power, yet also a test, if humanity could comprehend without panicking. If minds could process patterns across multiple scales, then perhaps they would pass the first threshold, but failure, she feared, could be catastrophic, as the beings above and below might respond unpredictably, a lesson in cognition, hierarchy, or control. And as the world watched in horror and awe, she worked feverishly, integrating patterns, plotting correlations, and attempting to construct a lexicon of light, pulse, and motion, aware that her success could define the survival, or the awakening, of the species. While Miguel's hands flew over the controls, his own mind racing to keep pace, mapping the bioluminescent signals against magnetic anomalies, orbital craft movements, and solar oscillations, realizing that the more data they gathered, the more patterns emerged, layers upon layers of intelligence, nested within one another, fractal and recursive. And Evelyn felt the weight of history pressing down, knowing that the entire endeavor required not just observation but active mental engagement, pattern recognition, and courage, because panic would distort perception, fear would corrupt interpretation, and misreading the signals might provoke unintended consequences, and the urgency intensified as coastal cities reported unusual seismic events, tidal surges, and electromagnetic fluctuations, all coinciding with the apparent synchronization of solar, oceanic, and orbital activities. Yet through it all, Evelyn perceived order, subtle but undeniable, the signature of intelligence operating through mediums she had never conceived could contain thought, intention, or awareness, and she began to suspect that these entities were both omniscient and omnipresent on a local scale, able to manipulate matter, energy, and perhaps even perception, across domains that humans had considered separate. And Miguel, voice barely audible over the alerts, muttered, "It's a language, a network language. They're teaching us to see the connections, to think in patterns that match theirs." And Evelyn nodded, feeling the thrill of discovery mingled with terror, because comprehension meant participation, and participation meant risk, and they were now active participants in a cosmic protocol whose rules were unknown, yet whose parameters were painfully precise. And as dawn approached, the sun's flares intensified to levels previously recorded only in extreme stellar events, while the oceanic leviathans breached with perfect synchronicity, their bodies glowing with phosphorescent symbols in rhythm with the light above, and Evelyn realized that humanity's window to understand was closing, that each cycle of observation, each alignment of flare, ocean, and craft, represented a finite opportunity to decode, interpret, and respond appropriately, for failure to perceive the underlying intelligence might be interpreted as incapacity, or defiance, or indifference, and the consequences, though unknown, could be fatal, because these were not forces to be bargained with, tamed, or ignored, but intelligences operating on scales and timelines utterly incomprehensible to human cognition. Yet Evelyn felt a surge of resolve, because she understood that passivity was not an option, that fear, while natural, must be tempered by discipline, observation, and the willingness to think beyond conventional human frameworks, and she focused, integrating data, cross-referencing signals, plotting correspondences between solar flares, orbital anomalies, and underwater bioluminescent patterns, constructing a mental model that, though incomplete, revealed structure, repetition, and intent, and she realized with awe that humanity had been presented with a first lesson in cosmic literacy, one that required expansion of perception, imagination, and cognitive agility, and as the alien craft above performed a series of maneuvers that cast shadows over coastal regions, while the oceanic behemoths moved in spirals perfectly aligned with solar pulses, Evelyn felt a profound humility, because she knew that, for the first time, humans were not alone in possessing or perceiving intelligence at a planetary scale, and that survival, understanding, and adaptation would depend entirely on their ability to engage, decode, and ultimately, communicate in a language of light, motion, and energy that transcended conventional human thought. The day began with a surreal stillness, the sun casting a strange, almost metallic light over the observatory, making every surface gleam unnaturally as Dr. Evelyn Hartley and Dr. Miguel Santos returned to their stations, their eyes weary but unrelenting, because the events of the previous night had redefined every assumption they held about the universe, and the sun itself no longer appeared as a passive sphere of fusion but as a dynamic entity, alive or at least animated by an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. While the alien craft hovered in orbit, silent yet impossibly present, its surface shimmering with energy that defied the laws of physics, bending light, refracting the solar flares into geometric patterns that pulse with deliberate rhythm, and Evelyn's mind raced as she tried to map the structures in the corona, noting that the crystalline formations seemed to shift in response to their instruments, almost acknowledging observation, almost interacting, a dialogue without words, conducted through light, energy, and motion, and beneath the oceans, the megalodons and other ancient predators moved with uncanny intelligence, their paps weaving elaborate arcs and spirals, forming synchronized patterns that mirrored the solar structures above, as if the sea itself were responding to the intelligence that orchestrated the cosmos. And Evelyn shivered at the thought that Earth had become a canvas for a performance whose scale spanned star, sea, and orbit, a grand design of energy and matter whose purpose was both demonstration and communication, and as she focused on the harmonic frequencies embedded in the plasma and oceanic bioluminescence, she began to detect repeating sequences, motifs that suggested an underlying grammar, patterns built from Fibonacci spirals, prime numbers, and geometric ratios, a primer of understanding, a reference frame for intelligence, and she realized with a thrill and a chill that the beings responsible had anticipated humanity's cognitive limitations, embedding familiar constants in alien forms to create a bridge, a first step toward comprehension, while Miguel manipulated a holographic projection of the sun's corona overlaid with the trajectories of the alien craft and oceanic behemoths, revealing a lattice of interconnected activity, a network of intelligent expression across domains. And Evelyn felt the enormity of the challenge, because they were being asked not merely to observe but to participate cognitively, to perceive patterns on scales that defied human lifespan and experience, and the consequences of misinterpretation were unknowable but potentially catastrophic, as military satellites detected unknown orbital objects moving with precision beyond any known propulsion, hovering over major coastal cities, while naval reports documented unusual tidal surges, currents moving with unnatural velocity, and the bioluminescent movements of underwater giants intensifying into rhythmic pulses that seemed almost deliberate, almost conversational, and Evelyn realized that these were not random events, not natural phenomena, but orchestrated components of a message, a display of intelligence communicated through the interplay of light, energy, and biological entities, while across the planet, humanity watched in awe and panic, news feeds broadcasting waves that rose without storms, skies filled with auroras at impossible latitudes, and satellites capturing the alien craft performing maneuvers that seemed perfectly synchronized with the oceanic giants, and Evelyn understood that comprehension was not just an academic exercise but a survival imperative, because the intelligences involved were measuring awareness, perception, and responsiveness, and failure to perceive correctly might be interpreted as indifference, weakness, or defiance, with consequences beyond human calculation, and as she worked feverishly, correlating the solar pulse sequences with the movements of the megalodons, she noticed a fractal structure emerging, layers within layers, nested repetitions that hinted at recursion, nested intelligence, and multidimensional thought, and Miguel pointed out correlations with temporal shifts in the orbital craft, suggesting not just spatial but chronological synchronization, a system spanning space and time, energy and matter, life and non-life, and Evelyn felt her consciousness stretch, trying to follow sequences that were simultaneously physical, electromagnetic, and perhaps even conscious, the very act of observation stretching her mind to accommodate comprehension, and she knew that humanity's first lesson had begun, a test in perception, pattern recognition, and cognitive endurance, and the sun flares intensify into coronal mass ejections that arc across the atmosphere, auroras stretching across continents, ribbons of plasma dancing in harmonic resonance with pulses from orbiting craft, while the megalodons breached in spirals of light, water, and bioluminescent signal, and Evelyn realized that the entire planet had become an instrument, the sun, sea, and sky aligned into a cosmic symphony whose score was written in energy, motion, and life, and the audience was humanity, invited, or perhaps compelled, to perceive, decode, and understand, yet unable to interact directly, limited by physiology and cognition, and the challenge was both exhilarating and terrifying, because comprehension demanded extraordinary discipline, patience, and the willingness to embrace multimodal intelligence, patterns of resonance, and nested symbolism that transcended conventional human reasoning, while alarms echoed in the observatory as government agencies demanded updates, military satellites confirmed untraceable objects, and global communications grids buzzed with urgent reports of tidal anomalies, auroral disruptions, and unexplained electromagnetic phenomena, and Evelyn felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, knowing that every observation, every calculation, every insight mattered, not only for her own understanding but potentially for the survival of civilization, because the entities orchestrating these events were assessing humanity in real time, measuring perception, patience, and adaptability, and as the sun formed intricate spirals and crystalline towers, pulsing with energy, the orbital craft mirrored every movement, while the oceanic leviathans traced arcs below, their phosphorescent patterns aligning perfectly, and Evelyn understood that these were lessons in synchronization, awareness, and comprehension, not merely displays of power, and as she worked, she detected signals embedded in harmonics, fractals, and light intensities, patterns that suggested sequences, logic, and perhaps rudimentary semantics, a language without words, encoded in energy and movement, and she realized with awe that understanding these sequences might allow humanity to participate cognitively, to align thought with the intelligence orchestrating the spectacle, yet the window of opportunity was finite, each cycle of flares, arcs, and marine movements providing only moments for observation, interpretation, and response, and she felt the exhilaration and terror of standing on the threshold of a revelation that might redefine biology, physics, cognition, and humanity itself, while Miguel, exhausted but focused, highlighted correlations between bioluminescent signals, solar harmonics, and orbital motion, revealing nested patterns, layers of intelligence, and multi-domain correspondence, and Evelyn understood that the entities were not merely intelligent, they were sophisticated communicators, embedding reference points to facilitate comprehension, a primer for perception and cognition, and the stakes were immense, because success meant not just knowledge but survival, adaptation, and the possibility of cooperation, while failure might provoke consequences beyond human anticipation, because these intelligences operated on scales, powers, and timelines that dwarf civilization, history, and evolution, and as the sun fled, casting shadows and arcs of spectral light across the planet, the orbital craft aligned in harmonic resonance, and the oceanic giant swirled below, and Evelyn felt a mixture of fear, wonder, and determination, knowing that humanity's first lesson was in progress, a cosmic curriculum of observation, pattern recognition, and comprehension, and that their ability to perceive, interpret, and respond correctly would determine not only understanding but the future of civilization, and as the auroras danced at impossible latitudes, tidal surges moved with deliberate rhythm, and the sun pulsed with intelligence, Evelyn whispered to herself, "We have to understand. We must." The world had become an intricate web of light, energy, and biological marvels, and Dr. Evelyn hardly could feel the weight of every observation pressing against her mind as she and Miguel Santos sifted through layers of data streaming in from every possible source, satellites, deep-sea sensors, and solar observatories, all converging to tell a story that was at once incomprehensible and breathtakingly precise, and she realized that humanity was witnessing not merely first contact, but an intricate, multi-domain communication system designed to test perception, cognition, and comprehension on a planetary scale, because the solar flares, the alien craft, and the megalodons were not acting independently, they were coordinated, a triad of intelligence expressing purpose through energy, motion, and life, and each movement carried a message, subtle but unmistakable, embedded in harmonic sequences, geometric symmetries, and fractal patterns that demanded intense focus to decode, while the oceans pulse with the movements of leviathans, each breach and swirl of water a note in a symphony that mirrored the sun's energy, each bioluminescent flicker a signal designed to resonate with the harmonic pulses emanating from the alien craft, and Evelyn realized with a thrill that they were witnessing a network intelligence, operating simultaneously above, on, and below the planet, orchestrating forces that span environments, dimensions, and scales beyond human comprehension. Yet, the very act of observing had become participatory, requiring not just attention but synchronization of mind and perception with phenomena that defied ordinary cognition, and she felt the exhilaration and terror of standing on the frontier of understanding, where the very act of comprehension could determine the difference between survival and catastrophe. While Miguel highlighted sequences in the solar flare intensity, correlating them with orbital maneuvers and oceanic patterns, revealing repetitions, motifs, and sequences that hinted at structure, perhaps even language, encoded in light, motion, and resonance, and Evelyn felt her mind stretching to process patterns that were simultaneously spatial, temporal, and energetic, a multimodal language that required extraordinary cognitive flexibility, and she realized that humanity's window to understand was finite, each alignment of sun, sea, and craft providing a limited opportunity to perceive, decode, and respond, because failure might provoke unpredictable consequences from intelligences operating on scales beyond human control, while outside the lab, the planet was alive with anomalies, tidal surges breaking records, auroras extending to equatorial regions, electromagnetic fields shifting unpredictably, satellites recording alien maneuvers in precise harmony with the solar phenomena, and news feeds were filled with images of oceanic leviathans breaching in elaborate arcs, their bioluminescent patterns synchronized with the flares above, a spectacle both awe-inspiring and terrifying, and Evelyn understood that the entities orchestrating these events were not simply intelligent, they were teachers, guiding perception, attention, and pattern recognition, embedding reference points to allow comprehension, yet doing so at scales that strain human cognition to its limits. While governments struggled to respond, military assets redeployed, yet all efforts seemed trivial in the face of forces capable of manipulating stars, oceans, and orbital trajectories simultaneously, and she feared that any misstep, any misunderstanding, could escalate into disaster, yet she felt a surge of determination, because comprehension itself was now humanity's only advantage, its sole instrument to navigate the unprecedented challenge, and as she integrated harmonic sequences, fractal patterns, and geometric structures, she detected recursive motifs, layers within layers, nested signals that suggested both repetition and progression, a narrative encoded in energy and motion, and the realization struck her that these intelligences were teaching, guiding, and observing simultaneously, measuring the capacity of human cognition to perceive nested patterns, respond appropriately, and adapt, and the stakes were immense, because the entities were capable of acting directly, yet their approach seemed deliberate, cautious, and evaluative, suggesting both intelligence and ethical discernment, while the alien craft above performed maneuvers that trace intricate arcs, casting light and shadow across Earth's surface, synchronized perfectly with the sun's pulsations and the oceanic giant's bioluminescent displays, creating a triad of harmonic resonance, and Evelyn felt the awe and fear that accompanies a glimpse of mastery at a scale that dwarfs human achievement, yet within the overwhelming spectacle lay clues, patterns, and sequences designed for observation and comprehension, and she realized that this was a lesson in perception as much as survival, a cosmic curriculum that demanded attention, patience, and cognitive flexibility, while the oceanic giants, moving in precise formations, interacted not only with one another but with the energy patterns radiating from the sun and the orbital craft, their paths tracing loops, spirals, and arcs that encoded rhythm, sequence, and possibly meaning, a network of life, energy, and intelligence that extended across multiple domains and scales, and Evelyn recognized that the very concept of communication had expanded beyond words, signals, or symbols, encompassing light, movement, resonance, and coordination across the planet itself, and she realized that humanity's perception was being tested, measured, and guided, because comprehension was now both the challenge and the safeguard, a tool for survival in a world where the rules were not written in history or physics but in the intricate orchestration of celestial and biological forces, while Miguel highlighted correlations between solar harmonics, orbital maneuvers, and oceanic signals, revealing nested sequences and temporal alignments, and Evelyn felt her mind expand as she attempted to trace multidimensional connections, recognize patterns, and predict responses, all while balancing fear, exhaustion, and exhilaration, because observation alone was insufficient, active comprehension and synchronization with the system were required, and failure, she feared, might be catastrophic, while success promised insight, understanding, and possibly even communication, yet the margin was thin, the scale vast, and the intelligence of the orchestrating entities profound, while the world outside struggled with panic, awe, and disbelief, cities reporting tidal anomalies, skies glowing with auroras at impossible latitudes, electromagnetic disruptions affecting technology and navigation, and news channels broadcasting footage of oceanic giants moving in unison with the sun's flares and the orbital craft, a spectacle that challenged every assumption of human understanding, and Evelyn knew that the lesson extended beyond immediate survival, encompassing comprehension of intelligence, coordination, and the ability to perceive patterns on scales and in modalities far beyond ordinary human experience, while the alien craft continued its maneuvers, tracing light and shadow arcs that mirrored the solar flares. as the oceanic giants spiraled in perfect synchronization, and she understood that humanity had been called into participation, invited or compelled to observe, decode, and synchronize cognition with forces that span star, sea, and orbit, a triad of intelligence, communication, and cosmic orchestration, and she felt a surge of resolve, because while fear was natural, comprehension was essential, and every calculation, observation, and insight now mattered not just for knowledge but for survival, adaptation, and understanding, and as the sun flared, casting spectral light across continents, and the oceanic leviathans moved with deliberate intelligence, she whispered to herself, we have to understand, we must see it, truly see it, knowing that humanity stood on the threshold of a revelation that would redefine life, cognition, and the very meaning of intelligence across the planet and perhaps beyond. The day had settled into a tense rhythm, a balance between chaos and observation, as Dr. Evelyn Hartley and Miguel Santos worked tirelessly to decode the signals that span sun, sea, and orbit, their minds straining under the weight of phenomena that defied conventional science, and as sunlight refracted unnaturally through the observatory windows, casting prismatic reflections across panels and monitors, Evelyn realized that the solar flares were no longer mere displays of energy but structured pulses, organized in sequences that hinted at purpose, almost like sentences written in a language constructed from light, frequency, and motion, while the alien craft above continued to trace arcs and patterns, its hull reflecting the sun's energy in ways that made it impossible to determine its true shape or material, bending perception as if reality itself were malleable, and beneath the ocean, the megalodons moved with intelligence that challenged every assumption of instinct or evolutionary behavior, coordinating their paths in arcs, spirals, and lattices, their bioluminescent patterns flashing in synchronization with the solar sequences, and Evelyn felt a mixture of awe and terror, because it was clear that Earth itself had become a medium for communication, a stage for intelligence operating at scales, dimensions, and speeds utterly incomprehensible to humanity, and yet every movement, every pulse, every flash of light carried meaning, waiting to be interpreted, and as she correlated harmonic sequences from the solar plasma with the bioluminescent signals of the leviathans, she began to detect recursive structures, patterns within patterns, nested motifs that hinted at a form of grammar or logic, and the realization struck her that these intelligences were teaching, guiding observation, perception, and cognition simultaneously, embedding reference points in energy and matter to facilitate understanding, and the challenge was enormous, because failure to interpret correctly might trigger unpredictable consequences, while success might allow comprehension, participation, and perhaps even communication, and Miguel, exhausted but focused, highlighted correlations between orbital maneuvers, solar flares, and oceanic pulses, revealing alignments that formed geometric and temporal symmetries, sequences repeating with variations that suggested both iteration and progression, and Evelyn understood that they were witnessing multi-domain intelligence, operating simultaneously across space, time, and life, and that observation alone was insufficient, active cognitive engagement was required, a synchronization of human perception with phenomena that span physical, electromagnetic, and perhaps even conscious dimensions, and she felt both exhilaration and dread at the enormity of the responsibility, knowing that humanity had been called into a cosmic curriculum, a test of attention, flexibility, and pattern recognition, and that the very survival of comprehension depended on their ability to decode nested sequences, recognize correlations, and maintain clarity under overwhelming stimuli, while outside, the planet pulsed with anomalies, tidal surges rising unpredictably, auroras at equatorial latitudes, electromagnetic fields fluctuating with unprecedented intensity, satellites tracking the alien craft performing impossible maneuvers in perfect harmony with solar activity and oceanic movement, and news feeds broadcasting images of massive oceanic leviathans breaching in synchronized arcs, bioluminescent signals matching the flares above, a spectacle that defied all previous understanding of physics, biology, or mathematics, and Evelyn realized that these entities were not merely intelligent, they were sophisticated educators, embedding reference points to allow comprehension, testing cognitive thresholds while demonstrating control, awareness, and power, and she shivered, because the margin for error was infinitesimal. And misinterpretation could have consequences humanity could not anticipate, yet she felt a surge of determination, knowing that comprehension, not fear, was the only path to survival, and as she integrated data from satellites, oceanic sensors, and solar instruments, she observed fractal sequences nested within harmonic patterns, temporal correlations that suggested a narrative expressed in energy and movement. And it became clear that these intelligences were teaching not only perception but synchronization, encouraging humanity to perceive multidimensional patterns and respond appropriately. And the enormity of the task was overwhelming, yet exhilarating, because the opportunity for understanding was unlike anything in human history, a glimpse into intelligence that transcended life, matter, and energy. While the sun flared in spirals that extended across the corona, arcs of plasma forming intricate crystalline towers pulsing with energy, mirrored by the alien craft above in orbit, and below, the oceanic leviathan spiraled in perfect synchronization, bioluminescent patterns creating a living, breathing code that was both visual and energetic, and Evelyn recognized that the planet itself had become an instrument, a medium for a message spanning sun, sea, and space, and that humanity's perception and comprehension were being evaluated, measured, and guided, because intelligence at this scale demanded not brute force but understanding, not reaction but awareness, and the stakes could not have been higher, while Miguel continued to map correlations, overlaying solar sequences with orbital maneuvers and Leviathan movement, revealing layers of complexity, repetition, and progression, sequences nested within sequences, harmonics overlaid with geometric precision, and Evelyn felt her mind strain to follow, yet she also felt clarity emerging, because amidst the overwhelming spectacle, there was order, pattern, and purpose, and comprehension was possible, if humanity could stretch beyond conventional thinking, embrace multimodal intelligence, and synchronize perception with energy, motion, and life across domains. And as dawn broke fully, revealing the sun blazing with unnatural brilliance, the alien craft casting arcs of spectral shadow across continents, and the oceanic leviathans breaching in choreographed arcs of light, water, and bioluminescence, Evelyn understood that humanity's first lesson had begun, a cosmic curriculum that tested perception, cognition, and adaptability, and that survival, understanding, and evolution depended on their ability to decode, recognize, and align with forces and intelligence operating at scales and speeds far beyond ordinary human experience, and she felt a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and resolve, knowing that every observation, calculation, and insight mattered not just for herself, not just for science, but for the future of civilization itself. And as the sun pulsed, the alien craft maneuvered, and the oceanic giants danced in synchrony, Evelyn whispered, "We must understand. We have no choice." By mid-morning, the world outside the observatory had become an intricate theater of synchronized phenomena, and Dr. Evelyn Hartley could feel every second pressing against her mind as she and Miguel Santos worked tirelessly to map, decode, and understand the interconnected signals that span sun, sea, and orbit, because it was no longer possible to consider these domains as separate. The sun's flares, the alien craft, and the oceanic leviathans were all components of a single, orchestrated system, pulsing, moving, and interacting in ways that suggested deliberate design, intelligence, and intent. And as Evelyn focused on the solar sequences, she noticed structures within the flares resembling lattices, towers, and spirals, geometric constructs that seemed to oscillate in response to the movements of the alien craft, while the megalodons beneath the ocean moved with uncanny precision, their paths forming arcs, spirals, and grids that mirrored the energy above, and the bioluminescent patterns flashed in rhythm with solar pulses, creating a multi-layered communication system that merged physics, biology, and intelligence, and Evelyn's heart pounded because the scale of the system defied human comprehension, yet embedded within it were reference points, repetitions, and sequences that hinted at logic, pattern, and perhaps even a form of language designed for cognition, a primer for understanding that demanded focus, synchronization, and extraordinary mental flexibility, while Miguel overlaid holographic models of the solar corona, orbital craft, and oceanic paths, revealing correlations that were fractal, recursive, and multidimensional, sequences nested within sequences, harmonics layered atop geometric motifs, and Evelyn realized with awe that these intelligences were teaching, guiding perception, and measuring comprehension simultaneously. And the task was overwhelming, because to succeed, humanity had to perceive multidimensional patterns, recognize nested motifs, and synchronize cognition with a system that spanned energy, matter, and life across scales far beyond human experience, while outside, the planet pulsed with anomalies, tidal surges defying forecasts, auroras dancing across unexpected latitudes, electromagnetic fields fluctuating in unpredictable patterns, satellites recording orbital maneuvers of the alien craft that seemed choreographed with the solar flares and oceanic movements, and news channels broadcasting images of oceanic giants breaching in elaborate arcs, their bioluminescent signals perfectly aligned with solar structures, a spectacle that overwhelmed and terrified humanity, yet embedded within it were clues, references, and patterns designed to be observed, decoded, and comprehended, and Evelyn understood that the entities orchestrating this symphony were not merely intelligent but educators, guiding cognition, attention, and pattern recognition, and testing human adaptability, and the margin for error was infinitesimal, because misinterpretation might provoke consequences from intelligences operating at scales, speeds, and powers far beyond any human capacity, while success promised not just knowledge but survival, participation, and even potential communication, yet the challenge required focus, patience, and cognitive expansion. And as Evelyn traced harmonic sequences in solar flares, orbital maneuvers, and oceanic bioluminescence, she began to detect repeating structures. Motifs nested within fractals, recursive sequences layered with geometric and temporal precision, and she realized that the entities were measuring humanity's ability to perceive, recognize, and interpret multi-domain signals, while the aliens above continued to manipulate arcs of light, casting spectral shadows across continents, mirrored by the oceanic giants' choreographed movements, creating a living, breathing code that communicated intention, sequence, and possibly meaning, and Evelyn felt both exhilaration and dread, because comprehension was not optional, it was survival, and humanity's first lesson had begun, a cosmic curriculum in multidimensional cognition, pattern recognition, and synchronization with intelligence that operated across life, energy, and matter, while Miguel highlighted correlations between orbital shifts, solar flares, and bioluminescent sequences, revealing nested patterns that suggested iteration, progression, and syntax, and Evelyn understood that this was a language without words, expressed in energy, motion, and resonance, and that mastery of it required cognitive flexibility, attention to detail, and extraordinary mental stamina, and the sun itself seemed to pulse in recognition of their observations, flares bending, twisting, and aligning with patterns traced by the alien craft and oceanic giants, as if testing their ability to perceive, synchronize, and understand, while across the planet, humans watched in awe and fear, cities reporting tidal anomalies, skies glowing with auroras, electromagnetic disturbances affecting technology, and satellites capturing impossible maneuvers, and Evelyn realized that the entities were not simply performing a demonstration of power, but a complex, multi-layered lesson, a measure of perception, attention, and the ability to decode nested signals, and as she and Miguel continued their frantic calculations, she felt a surge of resolve, knowing that comprehension, not panic, was humanity's only tool, and each insight, each correlation, each recognition of pattern was a step toward understanding, survival, and adaptation. While failure could provoke consequences beyond human imagination, yet within the overwhelming spectacle lay clarity, order, and method, a framework for cognition, and Evelyn recognized that the very act of observing and understanding these sequences was itself participation, a synchronization of human perception with forces and intelligence that span star, sea, and orbit, a triad of cognition, communication, and cosmic orchestration. And as the solar flares spiraled in crystalline towers, pulsing with harmonic precision, mirrored by arcs traced by the alien craft, and below, oceanic giants moved in choreographed arcs of water and bioluminescence, Evelyn understood that humanity had been called into an unprecedented test, to perceive, interpret, and synchronize thought with intelligence operating on scales, speeds, and powers beyond conventional experience. And she felt a mixture of terror, exhilaration, and determination, because observation alone was insufficient. Active comprehension was required, and every calculation, insight, and observation now carried consequences not only for themselves, but for the survival and understanding of civilization. While the auroras danced across the planet, tidal surges shifted unpredictably, and satellites recorded every nuance of the alien craft and oceanic giants, Evelyn whispered to herself, "We must see it, truly see it, or fail," knowing that the cosmic lesson had begun, and that humanity's ability to perceive, recognize, and act would define the boundary between understanding and oblivion, fear and insight, survival and annihilation. And as the day deepened and the sun's flares intensified, the synchronized movements above and below created a symphony of light, motion, and energy that was at once incomprehensible and utterly precise, and Evelyn Hartley, exhausted but resolute, understood that humanity had been called to rise to a challenge that transcended physics, biology, and cognition, a test in multidimensional awareness, and that every pulse, flash, and movement mattered. The world had entered a state of heightened tension and fragile wonder, as Dr. Evelyn Hartley and Miguel Santos continued their relentless observation, analyzing the intricate interplay between the sun, orbiting alien craft, and the leviathans of the deep, aware that every moment of inattention could mean missing a critical piece of the puzzle. And as the morning light struck the observatory windows with an almost unnatural intensity, casting prismatic reflections across the lab, Evelyn realized that the solar flares were forming structures, filaments, towers, spirals, that were neither random nor natural, their forms oscillating in rhythm with movements of the alien craft, while beneath the ocean, the megalodons and other ancient giants moved with deliberation, tracing arcs, spirals, and interlocking patterns, their bioluminescence pulsing in precise synchronization with the solar activity, creating an invisible web of energy, movement, and information that span multiple domains, a network of intelligence operating in real time and space. And Evelyn felt the weight of comprehension pressing upon her, because the universe had become a language, and observation alone was insufficient. Participation through perception and cognitive alignment was required, and every sequence, every pulse, every harmonic fluctuation carried meaning, a communication encoded in light, motion, and resonance. Yet comprehending it demanded mental dexterity and extraordinary focus, while Miguel manipulated holographic models that merged solar sequences, orbital paths, and oceanic patterns, revealing fractal structures nested within one another, recursive motifs, geometric symmetry, and harmonic resonance. And Evelyn understood that these intelligences were simultaneously teaching, testing, and observing, measuring the limits of human perception, attention, and adaptability. And the scale of the challenge was overwhelming, because failure to perceive correctly could provoke consequences from entities operating at scales, powers, and speeds beyond human capacity, while success promised insight, understanding, and perhaps even a path toward communication. And as she traced correlations between solar harmonics, orbital maneuvers, and bioluminescent pulses, she recognized sequences that suggested syntax, repetition, and variation, the rudimentary scaffolding of language expressed through energy and movement, and Evelyn felt a shiver of both awe and terror, because humanity had never faced a communication system so vast, multidimensional, and intelligent, and the very act of observing required expansion of mind, perception, and cognitive flexibility, while outside, the planet itself seemed to pulse with life, tidal surges rose unpredictably, auroras danced across unexpected latitudes, electromagnetic fields fluctuated violently, satellites recorded orbital anomalies that defied propulsion physics, and news feeds broadcast images of oceanic leviathans moving in elaborate arcs, bioluminescent patterns aligned perfectly with solar flares above, a spectacle that challenged every assumption of physics, biology, and mathematics, yet contained within it were reference points, patterns, and sequences designed to be decoded, comprehended, and internalized, a primer in perception and cognition. And Evelyn understood that the entities orchestrating these events were not simply intelligent but educators, guiding humanity's mind through observation, pattern recognition, and active engagement, measuring awareness, patience, and adaptability, while the alien craft traced precise arcs of light and shadow across the continents, synchronized with the solar pulses, mirrored below by oceanic giants spiraling in choreographed formations, and Evelyn realized that comprehension was more than survival. It was participation in a system whose scale and complexity transcended life, matter, and energy, while Miguel highlighted correlations between solar flare sequences, orbital maneuvers, and oceanic signals, revealing nested structures, iteration, progression, and recursive harmonics, and Evelyn's mind strained to keep pace, yet amidst the overwhelming spectacle she began to detect clarity, order, and method, patterns that could be followed, motifs that could be recognized, and a language, though alien, that could potentially be interpreted through multimodal cognition, and as she focused, she noticed temporal synchronization emerging, pulses of energy, light, and movement repeating with precise timing, matched across solar, orbital, and oceanic domains. A system operating in space and time simultaneously, and Evelyn felt both fear and exhilaration, because failure to perceive correctly might provoke responses from intelligences whose powers were unimaginable, yet success could grant understanding, participation, and even communion, while the oceans roared with leviathans moving in elegant arcs, their bioluminescence echoing solar sequences above, a living code that traced motion, resonance, and intent, and Evelyn understood that this orchestration was deliberate, a demonstration of mastery and a test of cognition, and as she and Miguel worked feverishly, correlating harmonic frequencies, fractal structures, and geometric motifs, she realized that humanity had been called to rise to a challenge that demanded focus, flexibility, and extraordinary mental discipline, and that the stakes were nothing less than the comprehension of intelligence operating on scales, speeds, and domains far beyond prior human experience, while outside, the planet throbbed with anomalies, tidal surges defying forecasts, auroras spanning tropical regions, and electromagnetic disturbances rippling through technology, satellites capturing alien maneuvers, while the world watched in awe and fear, and Evelyn knew that understanding the sequences was not merely curiosity or science, but survival, adaptation, and the first step toward engaging with intelligence that spanned sun, sea, and space, and as the day deepened, the sun's flares formed spirals and crystalline towers, the alien craft above mirrored arcs with impossible precision, and below, the oceanic leviathans traced choreographed loops of light and water, and Evelyn realized that Earth had become an instrument, a medium for a cosmic message, and that humanity's participation through perception, recognition, and synchronization with this multi-domain intelligence was both a privilege and a necessity, and she felt a surge of resolve, because while fear was natural, comprehension was essential, and each pulse, each sequence, each harmonic fluctuation carried meaning, waiting to be interpreted, and as the alien craft traced arcs of spectral light, the oceanic giants spiraled beneath, and the sun pulsed with energy that resonated across domains. Evelyn whispered to herself, "We must understand we cannot fail," aware that humanity's first lesson in multidimensional cognition, pattern recognition, and synchronization with intelligence had begun, and that every observation, calculation, and insight could define survival, comprehension, and the future of civilization itself. And as the spectacle intensified, she understood that the triad of sun, sea, and orbiting craft represented not only intelligence but also pedagogy, evaluation, and communication, and that humanity had been called to rise to the occasion, to perceive, to think beyond ordinary cognition, and to participate in a system whose skill, beauty, and power were beyond measure. The afternoon sun poured through the observatory windows with an intensity that seemed unnatural, refracting across panels, screens, and instruments, casting rainbow-like prismatic streaks over Dr. Evelyn Hartley and Miguel Santos as they hunched over their monitors, each tracking the intricate dance of signals that spanned sun, orbit, and ocean, because the reality confronting them was no longer abstract or theoretical. It was immediate, multidimensional, and impossibly precise, and Evelyn could feel the weight of comprehension pressing on her mind, the enormity of what she had begun to perceive threatening to overwhelm her at every moment, yet compelling her forward, because to stop meant losing connection with a system of intelligence operating on scales, energies, and rhythms far beyond human comprehension. And as she traced the solar flares, twisting into spirals, filaments, and lattice-like structures, she realized that each pulse was not random, but deliberate, harmonically resonant, and mirrored by the alien craft in orbit, which moved with precision that seemed impossible, bending light, energy, and perception in a display that defied conventional physics, while beneath the ocean, the megalodons and other ancient leviathans moved with purpose, their paths forming arcs, spirals, and grids that corresponded with solar and orbital signals, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in rhythm with the energy above, creating a network of intelligence that linked star life and matter in ways that transcended every model Evelyn had learned, and she felt both awe and terror, because Earth had become a medium, a stage, a living instrument, and humanity's role was no longer passive. Observation alone was insufficient, active comprehension, synchronization, and interpretation were required, each insight a step toward understanding, and each failure a potential misstep with consequences she could not yet imagine, while Miguel manipulated a three-dimensional holographic model, overlaying solar sequences, orbital maneuvers, and oceanic movements, revealing correlations that were recursive, fractal, and multi-layered, sequences nested within sequences, harmonics aligned with geometric patterns, and Evelyn realized with a thrill that these intelligences were simultaneously teaching, observing, and measuring, presenting humanity with a cosmic curriculum that demanded perception, cognitive flexibility, and multidimensional attention, while the planet outside reflected the scope of the challenge. Tidal surges rose and fell unpredictably, auroras stretched across unexpected latitudes, electromagnetic fields fluctuated wildly, satellites tracked alien craft performing maneuvers beyond propulsion physics, and news feeds broadcast images of oceanic leviathans breaching in choreographed arcs, their bioluminescent patterns echoing the flares above, a spectacle at once magnificent and terrifying. And Evelyn knew that comprehension was survival, that decoding the patterns, recognizing correlations, and maintaining cognitive clarity under overwhelming stimuli was the only path to adaptation, because the intelligences orchestrating these events were not simply powerful, they were deliberate, pedagogical, and evaluative, testing humanity's capacity for perception, pattern recognition, and coordination. While the sun fled into spirals, twisting crystalline towers of energy that pulse with harmonic precision, mirrored by arcs traced by the alien craft, and the oceanic giants moved below in perfect synchronization, their bioluminescent flashes forming living code, signaling not only motion but intent, sequence, and perhaps meaning, and Evelyn's mind raced to integrate these multi-domain signals, recognizing nested fractals, recursive motifs, and geometric symmetries that suggested language, instruction, and evaluation, a system designed to be understood if attention, patience, and cognitive flexibility were sufficient, while outside, the planet trod with anomalies, auroras painted skies, tidal surges defied models, electromagnetic interference disrupted technology, and humans watched with awe, fear, and disbelief, yet the signals persisted, consistent, precise, orchestrated, a challenge to perception and understanding, and Evelyn realized that this was a test, a lesson, and a measure of readiness, because the entities were not merely performing, they were assessing, teaching, and guiding, embedding reference points in energy, motion, and biological patterns to allow comprehension while measuring humanity's response, and as she correlated data across solar harmonics, orbital shifts, and oceanic sequences, she detected repetition, iteration, and temporal alignment, sequences nested within sequences, patterns repeating with variation, progression, and intentionality, and she felt her mind expand to accommodate multidimensional cognition, a form of awareness that required perceiving temporal, spatial, and energetic signals simultaneously, and as the alien craft maneuvered in arcs of light above, the oceanic leviathans mirrored the movements below, spiraling in choreographed paths, creating a living, breathing code that intertwined star, sea, and energy, and Evelyn realized that comprehension required synchronization, patience, and extraordinary focus, and failure to perceive accurately might provoke consequences from intelligences whose skill, speed, and power dwarf civilization, while success could yield understanding, participation, and perhaps even a form of communication, and as Miguel highlighted correlations between harmonics, geometry, and timing, Evelyn felt clarity emerging amidst the overwhelming spectacle, recognizing motifs, nested structures, and rhythmic sequences that formed the scaffold of comprehension, and as the day deepened, the sun pulsed with energy that resonated across domains, the alien craft traced arcs in harmonic precision, and the oceanic giants moved in unison. Evelyn felt a mixture of fear, awe, and resolve, because humanity had been called to rise to the challenge, to perceive, synchronize, and interpret, and each pulse, each movement, each harmonic fluctuation mattered, carrying meaning waiting to be understood, and she whispered silently, "We must see it, truly see it," aware that every insight, every recognition of pattern, and every act of comprehension could define the difference between survival, understanding, and failure, and as the auroras painted impossible skies, tidal surges shifted unpredictably, and the triad of sun, craft, and leviathans continued its mesmerizing, terrifying dance. Evelyn understood that Earth had become a classroom, a stage, and a medium for intelligence on a scale she could barely fathom, and that humanity's first lesson in multidimensional cognition, observation, and synchronization was in progress, demanding courage, patience, and extraordinary mental acuity, while the signals above and below continued without pause, a symphony of energy, movement, and life that spoke across domains, a language without words, yet intelligible to those willing to perceive, and Evelyn felt both fear and exhilaration, because comprehension was possible, but only if they remained vigilant, focused, and synchronized with the intelligence orchestrating the spectacle, a challenge that would define the boundary between understanding and oblivion, survival and annihilation. By late afternoon, the atmosphere in the observatory had become almost suffocating with tension and focus, as Dr. Evelyn Hartley and Miguel Santos pored over the data that spanned the sun, orbiting alien craft, and the immense leviathans moving beneath the ocean surface, because the scope of what they were witnessing was beyond anything humanity had previously encountered, a multi-domain orchestration of energy, life, and intelligence, demanding comprehension on scales, speeds, and dimensions that stretched the limits of human cognition, and Evelyn felt a mix of exhilaration and terror, knowing that observation alone was no longer sufficient, that the patterns and sequences unfolding across domains required active perception, synchronization, and interpretation, each insight a step toward understanding, each misstep potentially catastrophic, and as she studied the solar flares, twisting into spirals and lattice-like crystalline towers, she realized that the energy was structured, deliberate, harmonic, resonating with the orbital paths of the alien craft above, which spanned perception and light in ways that made it impossible to discern material or propulsion, while beneath the ocean, the megalodons and other ancient leviathans traced precise arcs, spirals, and interlocking paths, their bioluminescent signals flashing in synchronization with the flares and orbital maneuvers, creating a living, breathing network of intelligence that connected star, sea, and life, a system so vast and complex that human perception was both challenged and required to expand, while Miguel overlaid holographic simulations, merging solar, orbital, and oceanic data into a multidimensional map that revealed fractal structures, recursive sequences, geometric symmetries, and harmonic alignments, and Evelyn understood that the entities orchestrating these phenomena were simultaneously teaching, testing, and observing, measuring the limits of human awareness, patience, and cognitive flexibility, and that the window for comprehension was limited, because each alignment of energy, motion, and life provided only a finite opportunity to perceive, decode, and synchronize, and outside the observatory, the planet was alive with anomalies, tidal surges defying any known model, auroras appearing in equatorial skies, electromagnetic fields fluctuating unpredictably, satellites capturing alien craft performing maneuvers that violated conventional physics, while news feeds broadcast oceanic leviathans breaching in choreographed arcs, bioluminescent patterns perfectly aligned with solar pulses, creating a spectacle that simultaneously awed and terrified humanity, yet embedded within the chaos were reference points, repetitions, and patterns designed for comprehension, a primer in perception and multidimensional cognition. And Evelyn realized that understanding the sequences was not simply curiosity or science, but survival, because the entities were not merely intelligent. They were educators, guiding humanity's perception, testing responsiveness, and measuring the ability to recognize nested signals and patterns across domains, while the sun flared in harmonic spirals, crystalline towers twisting and pulsing, mirrored by the alien craft's arcs and the oceanic giant's choreographed loops, a triad of intelligence, energy, and communication, and Evelyn's mind raced to integrate signals across space, time, and life, detecting repetition, iteration, nested sequences, and motifs that suggested syntax and progression, a language of energy, motion, and resonance, while outside, the planet throbbed with anomalies, auroras danced in unexpected latitudes, tidal surges shifted unpredictably, and electromagnetic disturbances disrupted global technology, and yet amidst this overwhelming spectacle she began to perceive order, clarity, and method, because the entities orchestrating the events embedded recognizable structures for comprehension, patterns that could be followed, motifs that could be decoded, and a language without words that required extraordinary cognitive effort to interpret, while Miguel highlighted correlations between harmonics, orbital shifts, and bioluminescent pulses, revealing nested structures and temporal alignment, and Evelyn realized that humanity's role was participatory, not passive, because observation alone was insufficient, comprehension demanded synchronization, attention, and alignment with multidimensional intelligence operating across life, energy, and matter, and failure to perceive accurately could provoke responses from powers far beyond human skill, speed, or capacity, while success could grant understanding, insight, and perhaps a pathway to communication, and as the alien craft moved in arcs of light, the oceanic leviathans traced mirrored patterns below, spiraling in choreographed loops, and the sun pulsed with harmonic energy that resonated across domains. Evelyn felt the exhilaration and terror of standing at the threshold of understanding, because Earth had become a classroom, a medium and a stage for intelligence operating on levels that dwarf civilization, yet embedded within the spectacle were opportunities for comprehension, for recognition of pattern, for synchronization of cognition with phenomena spanning star, sea, and orbit, and as she worked, mapping harmonics, fractals, sequences, and nested motifs, she realized that the intelligences involved were deliberate, pedagogical, and evaluative, presenting humanity with a curriculum designed to teach attention, perception, and synchronization, while the stakes were incomprehensibly high, because every misinterpretation, every missequence, could have consequences beyond calculation, while every correct perception offered insight, understanding, and survival, and as the day waned, the solar flares intensified, crystalline towers spiraling in harmonic resonance, the alien craft tracing arcs above and below. The oceanic giants moved in synchronized loops of water and bioluminescence, creating a living, breathing code. Evelyn understood that the triad of sun, craft, and leviathans was not merely display, but communication, measurement, and teaching, and that humanity's participation required focus, patience, and extraordinary mental flexibility, and she felt a surge of resolve, because comprehension was now survival, and each observation, each recognition of sequence, each insight could define the difference between understanding and oblivion, success and failure, and as the auroras painted impossible skies, tidal surges shifted unpredictably, and the harmonic patterns of sun, craft, and leviathans continued their synchronized symphony, Evelyn whispered to herself, "We have to see it, truly see it, or fail," aware that humanity's first lesson in multidimensional cognition, pattern recognition, and synchronization with intelligence had begun, and that the outcome of comprehension, survival, and engagement with forces beyond imagination depended entirely on their ability to perceive, integrate, and act. The evening brought a strange, almost hypnotic quiet over the observatory, though the planet outside pulsed with unrelenting activity, and Dr. Evelyn Hartley could feel every neuron in her brain straining to process the multi-domain communication unfolding before her as Miguel Santos adjusted the data overlays, correlating solar flares, orbital craft maneuvers, and oceanic leviathan movements, because the complexity of the system defied conventional understanding, yet contained discernible patterns for those willing and able to perceive, and as the sun descended toward the horizon, crystalline filaments twisted and spiraled in harmonic sequences that mirrored the arcs traced by the alien craft above, bending light and perception in ways that made the physical impossible to define, while beneath the ocean, megalodons moved in arcs, spirals, and lattices that matched the solar and orbital sequences, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in perfect synchronization with the energy above, creating a network of intelligence, communication, and coordination spanning star, sea, and life, and Evelyn felt both exhilaration and terror, because humanity had become a participant in a system of intelligence operating on scales, rhythms, and energies beyond imagination, and comprehension was no longer optional. Perception, attention, and synchronization were essential, each insight a step toward understanding, and each misstep a potential peril, while Miguel highlighted recursive patterns, nested motifs, fractal structures, and harmonic alignments, revealing a language of energy, motion, and resonance that suggested syntax, iteration, and progression, and Evelyn felt her mind stretch to accommodate sequences that operated across spatial, temporal, and energetic dimensions simultaneously, and as she traced correlations, she began to detect sequences that repeated with variations, motifs nested within motifs, and structures designed to guide cognition, testing humanity's ability to perceive, recognize, and align thought with phenomena that transcended ordinary understanding, and outside, the planet itself seemed to respond to the orchestrated intelligence. Tidal surges rose unpredictably, auroras danced across unusual latitudes, electromagnetic fields fluctuated, satellites recorded alien craft performing impossible maneuvers perfectly synchronized with the sun and oceanic giants, and news feeds broadcast images of leviathans breaching in choreographed loops. their bioluminescent signals echoing the harmonic flares above, a spectacle that simultaneously terrified and awed, yet embedded within it were reference points and sequences designed for comprehension, a primer in multidimensional cognition, and Evelyn realized that failure to perceive correctly might trigger consequences from intelligences operating on scales far beyond human power, while successful perception promised understanding, participation, and perhaps even communication, and as the solar flares spiraled into crystalline towers, mirrored by arcs traced by the alien craft and loops formed by leviathans below, Evelyn felt both fear and exhilaration, because comprehension was participation, and observation alone was insufficient, demanding alignment of thought, perception, and pattern recognition with a system that spanned life, energy, and matter, and the stakes were unimaginable. Every miscalculation, misperception, or oversight potentially catastrophic, while every recognition of structure, sequence, or harmonic pattern could be the key to understanding and survival, and as she worked feverishly, mapping harmonics, fractals, sequences, and nested motifs, she recognized that the triad of sun, craft, and leviathans was simultaneously a test, a lesson, and a message, guiding attention, perception, and cognition while measuring humanity's response, and she felt a rush of both awe and determination, knowing that comprehension was the only tool available to navigate this unprecedented challenge, and as the sun flared, the alien craft traced arcs of light across the planet, and the oceanic giants moved in choreographed spirals, Evelyn began to perceive temporal alignment, repetition, and iteration, sequences nested within sequences, harmonic progressions that hinted at syntax, language, and intent, a system designed to be interpreted by those capable of perceiving multi-domain signals, while outside, auroras stretched across the sky, tidal surges rose unpredictably, and electromagnetic interference challenged technology, yet the signals persisted, coherent, deliberate, and orchestrated, a symphony of energy, motion, and life, and Evelyn felt the exhilaration of slowly deciphering the cosmic code, while understanding that the entities behind these phenomena were deliberate, patient, and evaluative, presenting a curriculum in perception, cognition, and synchronization that would test humanity's limits. And as Miguel traced correlations between solar sequences, orbital movements, and bioluminescent signals, Evelyn saw clarity emerging amidst the overwhelming spectacle, recognizing motifs, patterns, and temporal structures, a language of resonance and motion, while outside, the planet throbbed with anomalies and beauty, auroras stretching into the tropics, tidal surges moving in rhythmic arcs, satellites capturing precise alien maneuvers, and oceanic leviathans performing choreographed loops, creating a living, breathing code. And Evelyn realized that humanity's role was participatory, to perceive, synchronize, and respond with thought and understanding, and failure to do so could provoke consequences from intelligences whose capabilities dwarf civilization, while success might grant insight, communication, and survival. And as the evening deepened, the sun pulsed, the alien craft traced harmonic arcs above, the oceanic giants spiraled below, and Evelyn whispered to herself, "We have to see it, understand it, align with it," aware that Earth had become a classroom, a stage, and a medium for intelligence operating on scales beyond imagination, and that humanity's first lesson in multidimensional cognition, pattern recognition, and synchronization with intelligence had begun, and every moment of observation, every recognition of sequence, every insight could determine the boundary between comprehension and failure, awareness and oblivion, survival and catastrophe. While the auroras glowed, the tidal surges shifted, and the triad of sun, craft, and leviathans continued its mesmerizing, terrifying, and precise symphony, and Evelyn understood that comprehension was the only path forward, and that humanity's engagement with intelligence beyond life, matter, and energy had become urgent, necessary, and defining. As night fell, the observatory was bathed in a soft glow from the instruments and monitors, yet the world beyond remained alive with forces both magnificent and terrifying, and Dr. Evelyn Hartley felt the culmination of weeks of relentless observation pressing upon her mind, because what she and Miguel Santos were witnessing was the apex of multi-domain intelligence, a coordinated symphony spanning sun, orbit, and ocean, challenging every assumption about cognition, perception, and the limits of human understanding, and she could feel the weight of responsibility, knowing that comprehension was no longer merely academic, it was survival, participation, and perhaps the first step toward communication with entities whose power and mastery defy imagination. And as she studied the solar flares twisting into spirals, filaments, and crystalline towers, she realized that each pulse was structured, deliberate, and harmonically resonant, mirroring the movements of the alien craft above, which bend light and perception in impossible ways, while beneath the ocean, megalodons and other ancient leviathans moved in arcs, spirals, and interlocking grids, their bioluminescent patterns flashing in synchronization with the energy above, creating a living network of intelligence and communication across scales and domains. And Evelyn felt exhilaration and terror simultaneously, because Earth itself had become a medium for signals that demanded attention, synchronization, and understanding, and observation alone was insufficient. Active comprehension and participation were required, each insight a step toward survival, each misstep potentially catastrophic, while Miguel overlaid holographic models merging solar sequences, orbital paths, and oceanic patterns, revealing recursive structures, fractal sequences, geometric symmetries, and harmonic alignments. And Evelyn understood that the intelligences orchestrating this symphony were simultaneously teaching, testing, and observing, measuring humanity's ability to perceive, recognize, and synchronize cognition with multi-domain signals, and the stakes could not have been higher, because failure to understand might provoke unpredictable consequences, while success could offer insight, comprehension, and possibly communication. And as she traced correlations, she detected repetition, iteration, and nested sequences, motifs within motifs, layers of energy and movement that suggested syntax, logic, and intention. A language without words but intelligible to those capable of perceiving multidimensional resonance. While outside, the planet throbbed with anomalies, tidal surges defying physics, auroras painting skies far from expected latitudes, electromagnetic fields fluctuating wildly, satellites capturing alien maneuvers impossible to replicate with conventional technology, and news feeds broadcasting images of leviathans breaching in choreographed arcs, their bioluminescent flashes synchronized with solar flares, a spectacle both beautiful and terrifying, yet designed for comprehension. And Evelyn realized that the entities orchestrating these phenomena were not merely powerful, they were teachers, guiding perception, testing cognitive thresholds, and embedding reference points in energy, motion, and life to allow comprehension. And as the sun pulsed in harmonic spirals, mirrored by arcs traced by the alien craft and oceanic leviathans below, she felt the weight of awareness pressing on her. Because observation alone was insufficient, alignment of perception, cognition, and attention with the system was required, and the margin for error was infinitesimal. Yet every correct recognition of sequence, pattern, or harmonic structure was a step toward understanding, survival, and participation, while failure could provoke consequences far beyond human anticipation. And as the alien craft continued to maneuver with impossible precision above, the oceanic giants traced synchronized loops below, bioluminescent patterns weaving a living, breathing code of intent, motion, and energy. And Evelyn's mind strained to integrate the multi-domain signals, perceiving nested structures, fractal motifs, and harmonic repetitions, recognizing sequences that formed the scaffold of comprehension. While outside, auroras glowed, tidal surges shifted unpredictably, and satellites recorded every nuance of alien movement, and humanity watched in awe, fear, and wonder. And Evelyn understood that comprehension was participation, that Earth had become a classroom, a stage, and a medium for intelligence, operating on scales far beyond imagination, and that humanity's role was to perceive, interpret, and synchronized with a system spanning sun, sea, and orbit, a triad of energy, life, and intelligence, and as Miguel highlighted temporal alignments, harmonic repetitions, and geometric correlations, Evelyn began to feel clarity emerging amidst the overwhelming spectacle, recognizing motifs, nested structures, and temporal sequences, a language without words, expressed in resonance, motion, and energy, and she realized that this was not merely demonstration but pedagogy, evaluation, and communication, a curriculum in multidimensional perception, cognition, and synchronization, testing patience, focus, and adaptability. While the stakes were unimaginably high, every misstep or missed signal potentially catastrophic, while every successful perception offered insight, understanding, and possibly connection, and as the night deepened, the sun pulsed with harmonic energy, crystalline towers spiraling in resonance, the alien craft above tracing arcs of light that bend reality, and below, the oceanic giants moved in choreographed spirals of water and bioluminescence, a living code that intertwined star, sea, and life, and Evelyn understood that humanity had been called to rise to a challenge beyond imagination, to perceive, synchronize, and interpret with extraordinary mental flexibility, attention, and patience, and that comprehension was survival, and every observation, every recognition of pattern, every insight, every alignment mattered, carrying meaning that could determine the boundary between understanding and failure, awareness and oblivion, survival and catastrophe, and as auroras danced in impossible skies, tidal surges shifted unpredictably, and the triad of sun, craft, and leviathans continued its mesmerizing, precise, and terrifying symphony. Evelyn whispered to herself, "We must see it, truly see it, understand it, or fail," aware that Earth had become a medium for intelligence, a classroom for cosmic cognition, and that humanity's engagement with forces beyond life, matter, and energy had become both urgent and defining, while comprehension, alignment, and participation were the only paths to insight, survival, and perhaps the first contact with intelligence that spanned scales, domains, and consciousness far beyond human imagination. And as the night pressed on, Evelyn Hartley and Miguel Santos continued their vigil, minds stretched to the limits, hearts pounding, eyes fixed on flares, arcs, and bioluminescent pulses, knowing that humanity had been offered a rare opportunity to perceive, understand, and align with the orchestration of forces that breached sun, sea, and orbit, and that this lesson in observation, cognition, and synchronization would define not only their survival, but the potential for humanity to engage with intelligence on a cosmic scale. And in that moment, as solar flares twisted into crystalline towers, the alien craft traced harmonic arcs, and oceanic leviathans moved in choreographed loops, Evelyn felt the weight and wonder of comprehension, understanding that Earth was no longer just a planet, it was a stage, an instrument, and a participant in a living, breathing, multi-domain language of intelligence that humanity had only just begun to decode. And she whispered again, "We must see it, understand it, rise to it," aware that everything depended on perception, alignment, and the courage to comprehend what had never before been seen.